Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN WhatIf, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku wielded a katana and was raised by Chizome? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Another business trip? Inko knew that her husband had to travel a lot for his job, which did have a lot of income, but ever since they had Izuku, she had hoped her husband would take a moment and realize that they now have a child. Said child was only 2 years old and currently asleep in his nursery room. Sadly, yes. Hisashi frowned, taking Inko's hand and pressing it against his lips. It's only 3 days, and I think I got my boss thinking about a 1-week leave if I do well. He then looked up with a determined grin on his face. Then I know you'll do your best. Inko opens her arms for a hug, she receives it a second later and the two stand in a tight embrace for a few moments before Hisashi lets go. I love you. He smiles, pulling on his coat, then moving to grab his bags. I love you too. Inko hands him his hat, they exchange one last kiss before the man walks out the door. She remains smiling at the closed door for a whole minute, before looking down with a sigh. She walks back to her room, passing by Izuku to check on him. He was peacefully asleep, thankfully, so Inko retreats into her room for the night. You're late. And you're impatient. Hisashi approaches a hooded man in the dark. Are we ready to leave? The hooded man looks up, his face was flat and his mouth was stretched into a grimace. He nods and gets up from his sitting position. Our next targets are all the way in Kyoto, only 3. Hisashi informed, handing 3 folded papers, which were slightly creased and crumpled on the edges but otherwise well kept. Train is in 10 minutes, we should go. Of course, Midoriya. The walk to the train station was sullen, only accompanied by the occasional laughter from a nearby bar or a car driving by in a distant street. We should try a new killing method. Hisashi interrupts the silence. It would throw off any suspicions that all these killings are related. I thought you wanted to make a statement to the world. The hooded man replies, frowning, you can only do that if you let society know that you're doing something. Not yet. Hisashi ushers, one day, but not yet. We can't afford to have a single clue pointing towards us. He shuffles around his pockets for his phone. It was small and some called it retro, but he only had it so it couldn't be tracked by modern technology. Alright, fine, whatever you say. Later that night, 4 people were killed. There were 3 reported murders of fresh-faced pro-heroes, and 1 casualty in the villain attack that the heroes weren't able to stop until serious damage was done. Agakuro Chizome wiped the last few drops of blood from his blades and tossed away the rag into a trash can. He barely escaped death from that demed villain. He's not alive because of the heroes, he's alive because Hisashi Midoriya sacrificed himself. Chizome would be demed if he couldn't repay the man back. He could clearly remember what Hisashi was always muttering and rambling on and on about. He was a father only wanting to protect his son. Hisashi didn't want his family to be involved with the work he did, he never wanted them to get hurt. Now he was gone and there was nothing stopping the world from crumbling onto the remaining Midoriyas. The hooded man took a train back to Musutafa, then traced his steps back to the apartment under the name of Hisashi Midoriya. He knew what he had to do for Hisashi's sake. He couldn't save Hisashi, but he might as well save his son. Izuku? Yeah, Hisashi talked about his son often. How he longed to watch the boy grow up, he wanted to teach his son everything he could offer, he wanted to make sure he felt loved, he wanted to share each happy moment with his wife and kid. Chizome planned to let Inko join her husband in heaven while he took their son in. Teach him everything Hisashi wanted him to know. It was a dumb plan, but it was the only thing he could think of. It was better than stealing Izuku and leaving his mother believing that both her husband and son were dead. He could also just leave Izuku to live a normal life with Inko, but where was the interest in that? Arriving at the door of the apartment, Chizome hesitated. He never killed anyone unless they deserved it, but maybe Inko needed it. He picked the lock and entered the apartment. It was dark. He snuck around the rooms for a bit, first locating the little boy in the All Might-themed bed. Must have been a trend. He proceeded to track down Inko, who had her room locked. He picked the lock again and slid the door open. The woman was peacefully asleep. Chizome moved over, his eyes scanning to locate vital spots to strike. He decided to keep his kill mostly clean this time, so he carefully wrapped his hands around Inko's neck and squeezed. The green-haired woman immediately woke up and tried to scream, her voice caught in her throat. She tried to claw Chizome's hands away, desperately. He felt guilt he shouldn't be doing this, but he needed to. "I'm sorry, Inko Midoriya," Chizome muttered, gripping even harder, pressing his thumb forcefully against the pulse area in her neck, cutting off even more blood. The kill was taking a lot longer than Chizome had hoped. Inko kept fighting. She needed to stay alive for her son. She needed to wait for her husband to come home. She tried to breath, but it was so difficult. Everything was going numb. She barely heard whatever words were uttered by the murderer at her throat. "God, I'm so sorry." Finally, Inko was forced to go to sleep. After making sure she was gone, Chizome laid the body on the bed and covered her face with a nearby towel. He stood up from his position and went to wash his hands in the bathroom. He turned the sink on and let the water run down his filthy hands. He used a spare towel to dry his hands. He turned around and walked to the nursery room. He observed all the toys scattered around. He picked an All Might figurine up and turned it around for no reason really. Moving to the bed, Chizome debated whether to wake the boy or to keep him asleep until they were safe. He wasn't able to decide quick enough when the boy began to stir, a soft cry escaping his lips. "Sheet!" The man swore, carefully picking up the child and trying his best to cradle him back to silence. "Damn it, kid. Why are you so loud?" Izuku hiccups, a saliva bubble forming between his lips. "Geez. 14 years later. Hey. Watch the blades." "Sorry." Izuku ducked underneath the katanas being carried away by Chizome. "I got distracted." Indeed, the green-haired boy had been holding out a notebook and pen to scribble down random observations. "Of course you did." Chizome rolled his eyes. "Don't forget your allowance, it's by the table." The disfigured man hung up his blades, then moved over to ruffle the boy's hair. "Don't F things up at school." "I won't." Izuku responded, tying his noticeably red shoes, taking his wallet sitting in a small basket on the table by the door. "I'll see you later." And with that, he leapt out of the small apartment room and marched away to his school. For a boy raised by a crazed killer, Izuku grew up to be pretty nice. Izuku was quirkless, and he could never remember a time when he didn't wish he had one. He loved watching quirks in action. He loved seeing the dust fall from objects that were disintegrated by Shigaraki Tamura's hands. He adored watching people and other objects alike set aflame by Dabi's quirk. He was especially fascinated by Kurogiri's warp abilities. Oh yes, he grew up acquaintanced with the League of Villains. Izuku was told that 13 years ago, his parents died because of a maniac villain rampaging through the city. Chizome, his father's close friend, had taken Izuku to keep him safe. Instead of dropping the boy into an orphanage, he thought it would be better if nobody else found out what happened. Izuku paused at the pedestrian, patiently waiting for the street light to turn red so the people may cross. He looked up at the sky. It was beautifully clear and there were birds fluttering around gracefully. He took in a quick sniff, then sneezed. Dust reminded him of Tamura. Out of everyone in the league, he could call Tamura his brother, or at least a really close best friend. Izuku didn't mind that Tamura's quirk could only destroy, and Tamura didn't mind that Izuku could do nothing at all. They learned from each other, often spending time playing video games which usually evolved into a screaming match between the two teens. The stoplight turned green and Izuku gladly took a few steps forward. He and Chizome had recently moved into the area, with Chizome secretly being the horrifying hero killer, Stain. It wasn't easy to stay put in one area too long. With a new neighborhood meant a new school and Izuku was ecstatic to see what kind of people he'll be spending another year with. Hopefully none of them would mind the collection of knives Izuku kept in his bag. Fortunately, his walk wasn't disturbed by any kind of hero activity and he arrived at his school just on time. It wasn't meant much, but it was larger than his last school. Carelessly, he walked down the path that led to inside the school. After finishing up the traditional entrance ritual that all Japanese schools followed, he looked around and finally found his classroom. Sliding the door open, The first thing that caught Izuku's eyes was the head covered in spiky blonde hair. How could someone had hair that looked so luscious? Izuku had to ask how it was possible. He also needed to ask the kid about his quirk. He definitely saw a few sparks coming from the blonde's hand. In the middle of his thought train, angry red eyes met his own. Izuku heard a snarl directed towards him, and he was caught in between tensing up or smiling at the sound. "What the hell are you looking at, extra? Oi, didn't you hear me?" The ash-blonde student stood up from his seat, his teeth bared into a growl as he stomped towards Izuku. "What the hell are you looking at?" he hissed out, red eyes still burning a hole straight into Izuku. Without a second thought, Izuku blurted out, "I like your hair." The blonde looked bewildered at Izuku's sudden choice of words. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" he demanded. "It's a compliment?" Izuku responded, his chosen tone being unsure. "What? Are you trying to play nice with me? Is that it?" Okay, maybe Izuku was too quick to judge when he said that he wanted to get to know this guy better. At this point, Izuku had already leaned back to avoid probably getting bitten by the other student. "People say I'm naturally nice," Izuku says with a shrug. The blonde shakes his head with a scoff. "You piss me off," he acclaims, "and I've only known you for what? A minute? We're a little above 3 minutes, actually. If looks could kill, Izuku would probably be dead." The blonde looked absolutely furious. He was just about ready to pounce on Izuku and rip his head apart. The green-haired boy's hands twitched. He wanted to reach for his knives, but it was too quick. He's never provoked this easily. Guess this guy had such a terrifying aura to him that made Izuku feel so uneasy. "Bakugo." The blonde's head snapped away from Izuku and turned towards a man standing at the second doorway. He was dressed in formal wear and had a clipboard in his hands. Izuku assumed he was their teacher. "If you would kindly step away from the new student, that'd be great." Bakugo. The blonde's name was Bakugo. Izuku smiled at the new information. Bakugo let out through his teeth, then retreated back to his seat. Izuku moved through the classroom, carefully avoiding the other seats until he found the only empty one, which was the fourth seat in the third column, a few seats away from Bakugo. A few of his new classmates glanced at him. He flashed a friendly smile towards them. He was quite surprised to see the terrified look in their eyes. His lips turned down, his eyes led him away from the others and to his table. Why were they so scared? He liked to think that it wasn't obvious he was probably psychopathic. He's had friends before, at least he thought they were friends. They usually ran away after they found out Izuku's knives. The only person who's ever appreciated Izuku's knives was Toga. They enjoyed spending their time with a friendly match of the knife game. He missed Toga. It's been a while since they've seen each other. "Did he smile at you too?" "Yeah, it was super creepy. It looked like he was gonna kill me." Upon hearing the whispers from his classmates, Izuku's gaze phased into a glare. They think his smile is creepy? That's just rude. But Izuku was nice. He'll give them a chance to prove that they aren't all idiots blindly stumbling into society. People like that are the kind to be targeted and eventually killed. A blissful shiver ran up Izuku's spine, his lips tempting to curl into another smile. He raised a trembling hand and used it to cover the lower half of his face. There were voices. They were all talking at once, though there was one that was particularly standing out. Midoriya. That was his name. "Excuse me, Midoriya?" Izuku managed to knock himself out of his mental trance and looked up to see a hand waving itself in front of his face. His eyes widened slightly, but he tilted his head and saw that it was attached to the teacher standing in front. "If you want to, you can stand up and introduce yourself." Izuku's mouth fell into an O shape. He got up from his seat and looked around the room. "My name is Midoriya Izuku. Please take care of me." He offered the class a slight bow to pay his respects. "I move around a lot with my..." He paused. What was Chizome to him? He was more of an uncle. If Izuku thought about it, he provided Izuku with almost everything he needed, but he learned a lot of basic human etiquette from Kurogiri, and sometimes sensei. Shaking his head before he could get into another mumbling fit, Izuku started up his sentence again. "I move around often with my uncle. We arrived here in Muzutafa just 3 days ago." "Fascinating," the teacher remarked dryly. "Thank you for that. Please take your seat. With a curt nod, Izuku slid back into his seat silently. Classes started up like usual and Izuku was up and alert the whole. He heard every whisper within the class, every click from a pen, he heard the board discussion from the teacher. It was probably creepy. Izuku escaped to the rooftops to spend his lunch. It was stereotypical for romance and drama to occur on school rooftops, but this time it was specifically deserted. Which was good, he enjoyed eating in silence rather than being in a giant group. Speaking of eating, it seems that Izuku had forgotten his lunch. Hey, broccoli head. Izuku recognized the voice almost immediately. It's been quite a while since they've talked. The young boy turned his head and smiled up at the hand-covered face that towered above him. Shigaraki! Keep it down, stupid. Kurogiri brought me here to give you this. Shigaraki tossed a paper bag into Izuku's arms. I think it's food, I'm not sure. Izuku gratefully opened the bag, only to be greeted by a live frog jumping out. It leapt onto Izuku's chest then jumped down and began leaping away, but it was snatched up by Shigaraki. With 5 fingers wrapped around the small creature, it turned to dust in a matter of seconds. And Shigaraki was laughing. Shigaraki! Izuku squeaked out. He was caught off guard by the frog and was terribly surprised. What the hell? Your face. It was ridiculous. Izuku growled, throwing the now empty bag to tackle the taller boy. They wrestled each other for a few seconds before Shigaraki managed to pin Izuku down. Ah, and I thought you'd level up after so long. It's not fair, you're older than me. Izuku pouted, still trying to free his wrist from Shigaraki's 4-fingered grip. Doesn't matter, it just means that Chizome's not teaching you right. Izuku does his best to shrug. He's not teaching me anything. That's further proof that you should ditch the guy and come join my party. It was another one of these talks. Izuku grew up surrounded by villains, though he didn't see them as villains. He saw them as heroes on the wrong side of the law, or heroes with strangely violent tactics. Lately though, Chizome's been isolating himself, Izuku included, from the rest of the villain community. Izuku doesn't feel like he has to ask why. He's never wanted to question Chizome. But it seems Shigaraki doesn't like that. For the past 2 or 3 years, Shigaraki's been asking Izuku to join the league. He's even spoken to Sensei about it. So far he's only refused. He'd never leave Chizome's side, not after everything he's done for him. No thanks. Izuku says politely, like he always. Ah, come in Izuku. Shigaraki whines, it'd be so much fun. Izuku shakes his head, he's sure about his answer. With a chuff, Shigaraki gets up and crossed his arms, releasing Izuku from his hold. Fine, I can't guarantee I'll ask again next time. My answer will always be the same. Izuku smiles, to which Shigaraki replies with a vocalized shudder. You have a really creepy smile. Shigaraki comments, it's probably as creepy as mine. It's not my fault. Izuku shrugs, he didn't care if his smile looked creepy, but his classmates seemed to be very spooked by it. Whatever. Shigaraki snaps his finger and one of Kurogiri's warp gates swishes into existences. Come swing by the bar, I got a new game. I'm assuming you stole it? You know it. Izuku laughs, lifting his hand to his mouth. I'll try. Shigaraki lifts 2 fingers and salutes towards Izuku. See ya, loser. Later, handyman. Shigaraki rolls his eyes underneath his hand mask and vanishes into the portal, which then closed just as quick as it appeared. And Izuku was left alone on the rooftop. Or at least he thought he was alone. What the F was that? Izuku slowly turned his head to the door that led back into the school building to find Bakugo standing a few steps away from the door and 2 other students trailing behind him. If this went well, Izuku wouldn't have to stab anyone today. Izuku wasn't familiar with the 2 other students, but they looked like they had bad intentions from the way they looked at him. But Bakugo, oh Bakugo, his red eyes were flaming. He picked up the scent of a chemical. It smelled a lot like gasoline and scrunched up his nose. It was a lot different from the smell of blood, but it still wasn't a very favorable scent. I swear, you must have some kind of hearing problem. Bakugo announced, I've repeated myself twice and you still won't answer me? The blonde raised his hands and an explosion lit it up. Explosions, Izuku mouthed silently. He had to see that quirk in full action. Now was probably not the best time. "I'm sorry," was the first thing Izuku says. What you saw was just," Izuku hesitated. It'd be really suspicious if he said something about the league. "Well, what?" Izuku in a breath, then let out quickly, along with the words, "It was me quirk." "Your quirk?" Bakugo prompted for Izuku to confirm. The smaller boy was quite surprised to see that Bakugo managed to catch on to his quick words. Nonetheless, the green-haired boy nodded. "It's called Z0 relativity." He stuttered out, "I can open portals and stuff, but it can't reach that far." He brings a hand to the back of his neck and runs his nails across. A habit he picked up from Shigaraki. "My best friend says it feels weird to travel through them." Man, that was a big FING lie. And then there was quiet. And then there was. That sounds pretty badass. It was one of Bakugo's friends, the one of his left side. "You should show us some more." Sheet. Izuku used a forced laugh to buy himself some time to think of an excuse. "Oh no. Sorry, it wears me out really quickly." Come on, just real quick?" The one on the right said this time. "Can't be that bad." As Izuku opened his mouth to speak another excuse, one of Bakugo's explosions cut him off. The light, the sound, the exhilarating smell of gasoline coating the air, the faint shock wave from the blast that almost caused Izuku to step back. It was amazing. "Shut the F up, you two," Bakugo barked. "It isn't even that cool anyway." The blonde rolled his eyes, shoving his still heated hands into his pocket. "Let's just go back inside, it doesn't FNG matter." He turned on his heel and began walking back to the door. Izuku made the mistake of letting a snicker through his lips. "What the F was that, you dumb nerd?" "And nothing." Izuku squeaked out. "Why just save dash a lot?" "Yeah. What's it to you?" "It's pretty funny." "Well, Izuku's laughing was set aside when Bakugo literally spun around, bringing his hands behind himself and sparking an explosion that launched him forward at an incredible speed. His first reflex was to either step aside or get down to avoid getting punched. He imagined moving to the right would be better. Yeah, he was wrong when he was greeted by a strong right hook straight to the face. The impact made him see stars. He never imagined the blonde to be so strong. And think, this guy probably wanted to be a hero. He wanted to get into UA and become a pro. He's just going to get better. And Izuku's already thinking of adding him onto the list. "You fucking creep," Bakugo yelled, his feet scraping across the floor as he landed. "Why the hell are you smiling after I punched you? That was incredible." Izuku jumped around to face the blonde. "Please. Hit me with one of your explosions." "What the actual F dash?" Bakugo's face was just pure confusion. "I really like experiencing quirks firsthand. It'll help me better with my notes," Izuku elaborates briefly, "and I've had worse." That part was true. The worst quirk he's ever felt would be Overhaul's quirk. That sheet was straight up painful. They've only met once and Chizome doesn't plan on letting his adopted son get killed then brought back to life again. Bakugo thought of that as a challenge, so he sprinted up to Izuku, planting a palm right on his chest. Then with a grin, he blew it up. There was burning, like Dabi. There was the prickling and stinging pain, like Shigaraki. There was the warm feeling of blood dripping down, like Toga. God, everything about Bakugo seemed so villainous. Izuku expected the rough scraping when his back were to hit the ground, but it was never there. Was his body just so numb to the pain? Maybe he was focusing too much on the pain on his chest and paid no mind to the pain on his back? Wait, no. A mix of inky black and purple engulfed him just as he was about to hit the ground. There was the nauseous feeling of his body being pulled in all directions and his mind trying to bring himself together. Then he was gently laid onto the ground, a few feet away from Bakugo. That was it. One of Bakugo's friends exclaimed, "Bakugo, look. You got him to use his quirk." Izuku tried to sit up, but he could smell smoke from his charred uniform. He was definitely gonna have burns on his chest area, but his uniform mostly protected him. He put a hand to his chest, holding it still. He found it hard to breathe. It was so painful. It shouldn't be, he's had worse. Why was it so painful? Why? Get up, useless. Izuku tilted his head to the side to see Bakugo's foot nudging at him. "I'm not done with you," Class is gonna FANG start though, and if you show up with that then the teachers are gonna FANG ruin my record. It's already ruined in my eyes. For F's sake, stop being such a baby and get up. With a clump of forced willpower, Izuku pushes himself up. A few moments later he gets onto his feet, still a bit dazed, but at least the pain in his chest was numb for now. His mind raced to think of an excuse as to why he burned his uniform. He definitely didn't want to ruin Bakugo's chances of getting into a good hero school because he attacked a helpless, quirkless civilian. I'll talk to the nurse. Izuku mutters, I'll tell her you pushed me aside with an explosion because I was gonna get hurt. That sounds pretty heroic, doesn't it? Bakugo hisses, whatever. Just get to the FNG nurse and go change or something. Sure. Izuku picks himself up and escapes down the stairs. His mind still didn't move away from one thought. Bakugo is going to be one hell of a pro hero. And Izuku was going to follow him until the end of his life. Which, may be a little sooner than everyone thinks. Oh dear. The school's main nurse gasped the moment Izuku walked into her office. I'm hoping for an explanation. She dropped off from her chair, taking Izuku's hand and guiding him to a nicely cushioned chair. And I'm hoping that it wasn't Bakugo's bullying again. He bullies other people? Izuku pulled up a timid persona. He didn't want to blow his own trumpet, but he was a fine actor after learning from the best, namely Toga. Oh yes, the nurse shook her head, but it's mostly violent insults. It rarely gets to the point where he forcibly turns his quirk onto other students. This was flipped in Izuku's mind. He didn't use it to purposely hurt me. He began quietly. He leaned back slightly to give the nurse an opening to treat the burns on his chest. I tripped, earlier on the roof? I almost fell off and he pushed me away from the railings with an explosion. Izuku could have sworn he saw the nurse's eyes glow brightly for a moment while they scanned his body up and down. Did your eyes just glow? HM? Oh yes, that's my quirk. The nurse carefully opened up the boy's uniform, bringing up a soaking towel and placing it gently onto the burns. Oh dear, these are second-degree burns. Bakugo should have taken better care of where he aimed. She moved Izuku's hand so she could hold onto the towel while she went to look for burn ointment. Well, Izuku shrugged, at least he saved me. I'll give him that. The nurse returns with a small bottle. This is ointment. Hold onto that towel for 15 minutes. Then call for me and I'll apply the ointment. She sets the bottle down on a table very close by. With a nod, she went back to her own table to work on some files or something Izuku couldn't really see. After a good 15 minutes of Izuku staring up at the roof while having a wet towel on his burnt chest, he finally removed the cloth and set it aside. Miss? The nurse rushed back to the room, gracefully picking up the ointment. She had a cotton pad in her right hand, then used her left to pour the ointment into the pad. Very, very carefully, she dried Izuku's chest with a dry towel then applied the ointment. Izuku hissed slightly. The pain was chilling but not as close to the pain when the explosion first afflicted him. Do I need to reapply it tomorrow? If it still stings then yes. The nurse checked for any more injuries and was glad to see there wasn't anything too bad. And so, Izuku was sent home directly after spending his last class PRDS in the clinic. Oh boy, he sure had a story to tell Chizome once he got home. While on his way to the train station, he passed by an empty alleyway. By empty, he meant that there was a warp gate that emitted such an ominous aura that literally anybody who was anyone would avoid it at all costs. Izuku was not just anyone. He marched straight into the portal and had to deal with not losing the snack that the school nurse had given him earlier. On the other side, Shigaraki was playing on his PS4, his index finger carefully raised, his foot ledged onto the bar stool he was also sitting on. Hey! Shigaraki paused his game. Izuku. Midoriya. The warp gate user was standing in his usual spot behind the counter. I've been made aware that you encountered a bully on your very first day at the school. Izuku nodded with a hum, taking a few steps forward, using a foot to grab another bar stool so he could sit next to the gray-haired teen. It's not that bad. I think he was just suspicious of me. Why do you think he was suspicious? No idea. I probably gave off some pretty bad vibes. Kurojiri stopped, setting down the glass he had just been cleaning to look casual. You sound very neutral about it. Kurogiri knew what Izuku was like. He met the boy when he was 3, just a simple toddler that had such an appealing spark in his eyes. If things had gone differently, the boy definitely would have become a pro-hero, and a very good one at that. Yeah, I just, learned to accept it. Izuku was handed another controller by Shigaraki. Oh hey, thanks man. He took the controller, switching it on, watching a second character appear on screen, right next to Shigaraki's. Huh, look, my character's taller than yours. Piss us off. Shigaraki growls, moving his character to attack Izuku's. Kurogiri made a movement similar to an eye roll, setting aside the fact that he had to watch over both of the teens with his life. He was absolutely done with their childish bullshit. It was so much worse when Toga visited over. Stain asked us to host you for the night. What? Izuku turned his head to the bartender. What the hell is that supposed to mean? He was confused. What is Chizome doing? Why would he leave Izuku with the group he's been isolating him from? It means he's too busy to keep you at home, so you're gonna crash here for the night. Shigaraki elaborates with a slump of his shoulders. We're gonna spend all night playing this game. He still has school tomorrow. Kurogiri reminds coolly. That he'll be fine. Shigaraki turns to Izuku, brushing his fist against the other boy's shoulder. Hell yeah, I will. Izuku agrees with a determined grin that looked a little too similar to his father's. Kurogiri releases a sigh. While you are here, Sensei requests an audience with you. Requests or orders? Izuku asks, leaning back slightly to allow his feet onto the bar counter. Kurogiri clears his throat, signaling that he won't be answering Izuku's question. Another sigh and Izuku was off his chair. Not a second later, Izuku was swallowed by a giant black blob that transported him to All for One's hiding spot. Izuku's been there for a solid 3 times, but he's talked to Sensei over the TV for more than 10 times. You opened a warp gate at Zuku's school earlier. Shigaraki brings up, why? Kurogiri's reply is casual. He asked his classmate to attack him. He could have gotten a lot more injured if I didn't catch him. Why the hell would he do that? Shigaraki spits out, his eyes still glued to his game. You know what he's like. Kurogiri shrugs. He opens a small warp gate that gave him access to the glasses on the higher shelf. His classmate was hesitant, but he still attacked. How'd you know? Sensei told me. Kurogiri breathes out. He's always watching Midoriya. Izuku landed a few feet away from the chair that All for One always sat on. It took his eyes a few seconds to accustom themselves to the darkness. They focused rather quickly and he uncovered All for One looking down at him. Sensei. Izuku mumbles, bowing politely. How are you? I'm doing well. All for One says curtly, and you? My chest stings a little. Izuku admits, bringing a hand to his chest to highlight what he meant. But his quirk is so amazing. Who? All for One prompts, but he already knew exactly who Izuku was talking about. He watches Izuku, or at least he watches his heat signature moving. The boy is constantly fidgeting, hands twitching and head constantly moving slightly, and earlier when a very strong heat signature planted itself onto the boy's chest, All for One was intrigued. Katsuki Bakugo. Izuku lets out an exasperated breath. I saw his ID earlier, and he used his quirk on me. I'm so lucky. His hands move to his face, holding his cheeks down to prevent himself from smiling wildly. I can keep tabs on Bakugo if you want to know more about him. Izuku shakes his head politely. He wanted to know everything about Bakugo and he didn't need any help to do just that. No, thank you, Sensei. I can handle it myself. Of course you can. All for One makes a movement similar to a pleased smile. On another note, this wasn't what I brought you here for. Izuku's head tilts slightly to the left. Huh. My quirk, I'm sure you're familiar with it by now. Izuku nods again. You can take quirks from other people and keep them to yourselves or bestow them on those who are worthy of said quirks. Correct. All for One returns the nod. You may also know that I can pass my whole quirk to another person. He moves a hand and Izuku's eyes follows it, though if I do so, I won't have much time to live. So I want to find a proper successor so that I may leave this wretched world knowing that my successor will do as I want him to. At this, Izuku's eyes widened. All for one. The quirk was insanely powerful. It sounded so overwhelming as well. Having to store so many quirks into one body when it's supposed to be accustomed to having only one. It'd take years of experience to get it under control. What are you saying, sensei? Izuku questions. He wanted to be sure he was understanding the situation properly before making any assumptions. In time, I will be too weak to properly pass down my quirk. All for one breathes out another sigh. What I'm saying, young Midoriya, is that I want you to be my successor. Izuku sputters wordlessly. He had the smallest hunch that sensei might say something like that, but actually hearing the words made the world around him explode. Sensei? Calm down, my boy. All for one says calmly, I'm not going to force this role upon you. He had a backup plan if Izuku refused the quirk anyway. Though there is a catch. What is it? You're going to have to dedicate yourself as part of the league. Izuku's mind reels itself together and prepares himself to reply. Before you say no, please consider it, Midoriya. All for one raises both his hands to silence the boy before him. You wouldn't even have to leave Stain. If you can convince him, both of you can join the league. He closes his hand into a fist, but leaves the index finger and points it towards the green-haired boy, and you will be the one to finally change the world. Izuku thinks about it. He really thinks about it. He evens out the possibilities that came with this offer. He thought about how much he could do with a quirk like All for One and an entire league of supporters behind him. It's so different. I can give you more time to think about it. All for One offers. I think I need that. Izuku gives a shy and shaky nod. See, can I tell anyone? You may discuss this with Stain. Okay. All for One activates his teleporting quirk and removes Izuku from the room. It was silent again, and the monster of a man was left to wonder if the boy was going to accept or not. Out of everyone he's ever met, Izuku Midoriya was by far the most unpredictable one. Izuku was set down right next to Shigaraki, his knees buckled and he almost fell once his feet made contact with the floorboards. Shigaraki spared him a glance, raising an eyebrow. Well, I think I'm gonna go outside real quick. Izuku didn't wait for their permission and walked out the door. This might as well be the best opportunity he's ever been given, and Izuku was definitely the kind of guy to jump and grab any opportunity by the throat and throttle them until he succeeds. How much time could he spare before All for One withdrew the offer? He wasn't sure. He could ask, but he didn't feel like it. Izuku shoved his hand into his pocket, taking out his phone, which only had one contact in it. Izuku Chizome? I really need to talk about something. Bloody boy, what's up, kid? Bloody boy, when the F. Did you change my nickname, you little punk? Izuku. That lifted his spirits a little, but he had to hold that explanation for a later day. Izuku, what are you doing later? Why are you leaving me with the league? Bloody boy, the hell are you talking about? Izuku? Bloody boy, why the F? Are you hanging around them? Bloody boy, get back to the apartment, right now. Izuku, you gonna tell me what sensei talked to you about, or am I gonna have to guess? Shigaraki was right behind him and Izuku never even noticed. The green-haired boy jumped slightly, shoving his phone back into his pocket. It was nothing. Izuku says dully, he just wanted to ask about my new school. Man, it's so fun to lie to the people closest to you. Oh, okay, cool. Shigaraki rolls his shoulders back. So, you gonna get back inside? Gimme a few more minutes. Izuku looked straight into Shigaraki's ever-so-dead eyes. The taller teen eyes him suspiciously, both his hands are shoved into his pocket. Interesting fact. Izuku knows how Shigaraki keeps from disintegrating his breathes on accident when he constantly has his hands in his pocket. He keeps his hands as fists, with his thumb tucked in between his palm. Shigaraki's complained about it being uncomfortable, but he's become accustomed to it. What? Why? Shigaraki glared down at the smaller boy. I'm gonna call someone. It was a vague excuse, yes, but the vagueness would assist him. Shigaraki still eyed him suspiciously. Fine, whatever, it's not like I give a shit. The teen scoffs, turning around in haste. Hurry up before I finish the game without you. It's a practically empty threat. Shigaraki definitely wanted someone at his side when he played his new game. Once Shigaraki was inside the bar again, Izuku bolted. He moved through the familiar roads until he got to the train station of the area. There weren't too much people, with the rush hour being over, the place was pretty silent. Sometimes corridors were blocked by people with mutation quirks and their enlarged limbs, but Izuku squeaked past them and managed to board a train that brought him to another station a few feet away from his apartment complex. It was quiet in this area too. He tried his best not to make too much noise while he barreled up the stairs. Once he got to his door, he knocked on it, and not a second later was he trapped in a hug. He didn't hesitate to hug back. "God damn it, kid." Chizome hissed desperately. "I was so effing worried." The man removed his arms from around Izuku, then proceeded to slap the boy across the back of his head. "I told you to stay away from them." "I acted on impulse," Izuku admitted. "They said you were too busy to watch over me, so you asked them to babysit me." "You don't even need a babysitter, you punk." Chizome sighed, swinging his right arm around his technical son, bringing the boy into the room. "Get the F inside. If I was any worse, I'd lock you in your room for the next week." "Can I have some ice?" Izuku suddenly asked. "Ha! Ice. Of course we have ice, dummy, but why do you need it?" Chizome removed his arm from the boy's shoulder and let him sit on the couch on his own while he went to get an ice pack from the fridge. While his technical father was gone, Izuku opened his uniform, letting the chill air brush against his burnt skin. Chizome returned with a blue ice pack a minute later and almost dropped it. "What the F, Izuku?" he shrieked. "Who the F did that to you? And do you need me to FNG drive a knife into their throat?" Izuku snorted, reaching a hand out and making a grabbing motion. Chizome handed him the ice pack. Izuku gently put it on his chest, and it relieved a lot of the compressed heat he felt. "It was my new classmate." "Who?" Chizome suddenly whipped out a sharp and very well-kept knife. "You can't kill him yet?" Izuku exclaimed, much to Chizome's disappointment. "We need to wait for him to become a fully fledged pro hero." He explains, moving his hands to express his words. "He already has so much potential, it's so cool." "Yet he turned his quirk to you?" Chizome clicks his tongue. "That's some sheet hero material right there." "I asked him to do it." "Why the F?" "Research, Chizome." Izuku said calmly. "Research? You're insane." "Says you." Izuku retorts, "I'm gonna take a nap." "What?" "No, you have to tell me more," Chizome demanded, sitting next to the boy. Izuku smiled, leaning his head back and closing his eyes, letting out an excessive snore. "Wow, okay, ouch." Izuku snorted again, the movements in his chest almost pushing off the ice pack. He opened his eyes again, turning to Chizome. A lot of people had commented on how terrifying Chizome's face was, specifically his eyes, but Izuku never saw a problem with them. If anything, he could see a fiery conviction in them. "His name's Katsuki Bakugo," Izuku began. "He has pretty blonde hair, crimson red eyes, a great smile." "Wow, I can't believe my son is gay." "Even if I was gay, that'd be alright, right?" "Well duh, you're still Izuku." "Okay, cool anyways." "His quirk is called explosions." "He can blow himself up?" Chizome asked, leaning back farther into the couch and raising his feet up onto the coffee table in front of them. "Not exactly." Izuku shrugs. "From what I can tell, he can secrete a chemical mixed with his sweat, and when it reaches his palms, he can spark it." "Interesting." Chizome comments, "Could I see those burns?" Izuku nodded, removing the ice pack and showing the wounds already in the process of healing. Chizome hisses, "Sheet, Izuku, those are second-degree burns." "Oh yeah, I know." "God, you're so crazy. I wonder who I get it from." Izuku snarks, lips curling in a smile. Chizome shakes his head. "Anything else you want to tell me before I go out to get dinner?" "Oh right." Izuku put a hand up, hinting that what he was about to say was actually important. "I talked to All for One." If Chizome had been drinking something, he would have spit it out in shock. He told me he was looking for a successor." Chizome nodded, prompting the boy to continue with the story. "And he asked me to be his successor." The man before him suddenly grabbed his shoulders, shaking the boy slightly. "Tell me you said no, Izuku." "I told him I would think about it." "Why would you even give that a second thought?" "Once again, I was acting on impulse." "For FS sake, Izuku, you can't become that monster's successor, no matter what." Chizome grits his teeth. "That quirk is going to ruin you." And at once, Izuku's thoughts of considering all for one's offer disappeared from his mind. If Chizome was against the idea, then Izuku didn't have to give a shit. "Okay. Good." Chizome releases the boy from his grip. "And don't go near them, ever. You're going to stay the F away from those BSS. Shigaraki's not that bad. He's a brat." "True." Chizome lets out another sigh, though this time it was more relieved rather than frustrated. "Anything else?" "Nope." Izuku leans back, the heavy weight in his shoulders gone. "Okay." The man stands up. "Lock the doors, I'm bringing a key, so if anyone knocks, don't you dare answer them." "Sure thing, Dad." Izuku lazily salutes, his eyes following his father to the door. "Watch yourself, Izuku." And with that, he's out the door with a good over his head and hands in his pocket. "Zuka left." Shigaraki sounded said, but not quite. There were hints of confusion and slight betrayal. "Why'd he leave?" "He found out that we were lying." Kurogiri answers simply, and rather bluntly in Shigaraki's opinion. "Sensei got what he needed from the boy anyway, he was bound to leave eventually. But I actually wanted to play this game with him." Shigaraki huffs. "It had such good ratings and it took me a while to get my hands on a copy." He crosses his arms, lips turning into a pout underneath the hand on his face. "What did Sensei want from him anyway?" "You'll know soon enough, Tamura Shigaraki." Shigaraki scoffs, getting up from his bar stool. "I'm going to sleep, don't wake me up," he commands, slamming the door he passes through to get to his room. Kurogiri turns his shapeless body to the TV screen that lit up a moment after Shigaraki left. "What will happen if Midoriya refuses?" Kurogiri asks carefully, making sure not to be too loud. "Then you just saw my successor slam the door to his room." All for one informs. Kurogiri narrowed his eyes. "Is that wise?" "Of course." All for one's bodiless voice reassures. "It may not be obvious, but Shigaraki and Midoriya both have equal amounts of potential. Midoriya could do things Shigaraki cannot, and the same goes for vice versa." "All right, I trust your judgment. I'll keep an eye on Midoriya, you will make sure Shigaraki doesn't try to get to the boy on his own." "Yes, sir." With that, the screen went dead and Shigaraki went back to wiping already clean glasses in complete silence. A few weeks of school went rather peacefully. Izuku accomplished another edition of his quirk analysis series. They were originally named Hero Analysis, but he thought it was a bit discriminative. There were plenty of interesting quirks that belonged to people outside of the hero category. He had notes on all his classmates. He had their names, birthdays, interests, and blood type written down for personal reasons. Most of them took up a page or two, but the topic of Bakugo alone took up 5 pages. Some had interesting quirks, such as being able to turn their hair into rocks, or pulling their eyes out of their head but not being able to separate them completely. One of Bakugo's lackeys had a quirk that let him extend his fingers to extreme lengths. Out of every single one of them, Bakugo was the best. Not only did Bakugo have a strong and flashy quirk, but he was intelligent. He analyzed things quickly and thought of plans that almost never failed him. The blonde was the absolute perfect student, save for his terrible attitude. After the first day though, Bakugo never really paid attention to the green-haired boy, preferring to avoid him instead of provoke him. He hasn't seen a single sign of the League too, but he knew that all for one was watching him. It was frustrating and Izuku wanted the eyes to go away, but he just couldn't shake them. It was early morning and Izuku was just trying not to seem too stiff in his seat. With the teacher up front and discussing something about future courses, Izuku was busy staring at his clamped hands. At some point, the class suddenly erupted and quirks were being used in every corner of the classroom. Izuku jumped slightly at the sudden action, and sound finally returned to his ears. He heard something about the hero course, then he heard explosions. Bakugo leapt onto his table, jerking a thumb towards himself. I'm the only one is this garbage school worthy of getting into UA. If you guys are lucky, you'll get to sidekick some D-level hero. He stuck out his tongue mockingly, earning angry remarks from his classmates, but he shut them up with more explosions. Well, you do have B impressive test scores. The teacher in front pushed up his glasses. Huh? Oh, Midoriya, you want to sign up for UA too? The class fell silent for a bit, then burst out laughing. He heard comments in the range of, aren't you quirkless? You want to get crushed in the exams? He's too plain to be a hero. Bakugo spun around, slamming his hand into Izuku's desk and blowing it up. The heat radiated around the desk and Izuku shivered with delight. What the hell do you think you're doing, useless? I have a name. Izuku dared to look up at the blonde cowering over him. I don't give a shit. Bakugo snarled. It seemed the teacher didn't seem to care about the situation, he was just watching. Bakugo brought a hand and planted it onto Izuku's chest. Izuku could feel the heat from it. The scars from before stung slightly, they were so evident and some people would call it ugly, but Izuku viewed it as a fond memory. Right when Bakugo was about to blast more wounds onto Izuku, a vortex of black and purple appeared under the blonde and se him in, throwing him out on the other side of the classroom. Kurogiri, the voice in Izuku's reminded. Holy shit! One of his classmates exclaimed. Was that your quirk? Yeah. This time, one of Pug's friends replied. He calls is zero relativity, whatever that means. He can open portals NCRP. Suddenly the class began whispering to each other. They seemed to forget the nuclear bomb set to explode on the other side of the room. Bakugo screamed, barreling through the desks and reaching for Izuku by the collar, only to be stopped by another portal that swallowed him and dropped him from the ceiling. Okay, alright, stop it. The teacher sighed. I'm gonna remind you that usage of quirks without permission is still strictly prohibited, so unless you too want punishment, I recommend you stop. Izuku had to stop himself from saying that he wasn't the one creating the portals. Bakugo growled, deep, before returning to his seat hastily, the heat from his palms steadily cooling down. By the end of the day, Izuku got a blistering red mark on his shoulder, his 13th quirk analysis notebook charred and soaking wet, and his pride was all but okay. It didn't matter though, just because Bakugo was terribly mean to him doesn't strip him away from his potential to be a hero. Izuku had to remind himself that even some of the best heroes don't have a perfect backstory to them. After drying up the notebook, he tucked it into his backpack and began heading home. His usual path was blocked by some constructions, so he found himself passing underneath a bridge. It was quiet. Or at least it was quiet up until the point when the manhole lid behind him shot into the air, making a loud clang when it crashed back onto the ground. From the hole emerged a large amount of green slime. It looked disgusting. Oh, it's my lucky day. The slime began moving towards him. The voice was gurgled when it spoke and Izuku had no time to react. The next thing he knew he was being constricted by the slime. He couldn't get its hands on it. Stupid quirk. He couldn't breathe, and if he tried it burned. There was slime entering him, through his mouth, his nose, even his ears. Thoughts grew fuzzy and his eyesight was blurred with all the tears falling out. He was going to die. Nothing that Chizome taught him would help him here. He couldn't scream for help. He couldn't use the basic self-defense moves that his father had taught him. He couldn't get his knives, his bag was too far away. He did have one knife hidden under his blazer, but his limbs didn't seem to function the way he hoped they would. Then out of nowhere, there was a large pulse of wind that blew the slime monster away. Izuku's mind switched back on for a good 5 seconds. He managed to move his arm, grabbing his knife and tossed it in a random direction. He fell unconscious with the sound of his knife hitting a target. Did this kid just throw a knife? Toshinori looked at his shoulder again. There was indeed a knife stuck in his muscle-covered shoulder. It didn't really hurt, but there was a knife in his shoulder. This kid just threw a knife. Carefully, the symbol of peace dislodged the weapon from his shoulder, then began gathering the slime into 2 bottles. The fact that the villain was unconscious made the job easier. Once that was finished, he put the bottles into the pockets of his briefs, then very cautiously moved to the unconscious boy. Using his free hand, he lifted the boy and brought him into a quiet yet open street. where he tried to shake the boy back into consciousness. He was beginning to fear that he was too late to save the boy and grew more frantic with his shaking. Luckily, the boy began to stir and All Might stepped back. "Thought I lost you there." This was so much worse than Bakugo's explosion. That was bad, but this was so unbearably painful Izuku would rather die than wake up again. He felt shaking, his mind was screaming at him to wake and get back on his feet. When he did open his eyes, he was practically blinded by the shiny smile above him. "Thought I lost you there." Oh my god. That was All Might. The one man in the world who is exempted from Stain's list. He who is worthy of being called a true hero. Izuku jumped back, his palms scraping against the ground. He tried to speak out, to stutter and to say thank you, but when he tried to open his mouth, he felt the bile rise in his throat. He got up, then bent over again and threw up. His vomit included remnants of the slime monster. Oh! All Might took a stride forward to try and pat Izuku's back, but the boy raised a hand. He could handle this, and he didn't want All Might near his vomit. "Are you all right, my boy?" "I'm okay." Izuku coughed out, his throat felt rough. "I'm sorry." All Might made a huh noise. "Whatever do you mean?" "I'm sorry for stopping you." Izuku uses his uniform's sleeve to wipe away the vomit around his mouth. I didn't want to get vomit on you." "It's all right, my boy." All Might says supportively, "But I do have a question." It was Izuku's turn this time to mutter a huh. All Might pulls out the knife. "Is this yours?" Toshinori raised his eyebrows slightly, leaning forward in anticipation to hear the boy's response. He held the knife out for the kid to take back, but he was completely and utterly frozen in his position. It was pretty funny to see. It was silent for a few more moments, just the boy staring, dumbfounded at the knife in Toshinori's hands. Eventually, the aching pain in his left side reminded him of his time limit, so he cleared his throat and opened his mouth to speak. The boy's eyes flickered up to his shoulder, then back at the knife. Did I?" Toshinori nods, putting a hand to his own shoulder. "It took me by surprise. But do not worry, it was merely a scratch." He noticed a flash of fear or concern in the boy's eyes. "If this is yours, I encourage you take it back, young one." Izuku's mind finally came back to him and he was thinking again. God, he was so stupid. He threw a knife in a random direction, and it stabbed All Might. Chizome was gonna give him hell when he gets home. Quickly, Izuku nervously takes the knife out of All Might's hands and tucks it back into its sheath underneath his uniform's blazer. Izuku mumbles out, "The thank you." "No need to thank me." All Might had a really loud voice, Izuku noted. "I just wish I could have captured the villain before he attacked you. My apologies." The hero bows slightly but not all the way. "You did well." "I didn't do anything." "Well, he did something. He stabbed All Might." His brain was not going to let that drop soon. The hero clears his throat. "Well then. Now that I've contained the villain." The blonde man pats his pockets that carried the bottles filled with slime. "I'll be off." "Yo, you're leaving?" "Yes." As much as heroes fight villains, we also have to fight against time. The man says in a tone that doesn't quite click with Izuku. "Now then. Step back, I'm taking off." "Wait, no." Izuku reaches forward to try and grab the man's breaths before he can take off, but his body hesitates. He's a hero. You are not. He doesn't know where the voice comes from, but it's the reason he misses his chance to follow All Might. The symbol of peace was long gone by the time Izuku realizes it. Izuku runs up the stairs of his apartment complex, almost bumping into one of his neighbors on his way up. He rushes to his room, fumbling with his keys to get the door open, then slams it open while yelling, "I met All Might." This time, Chizome actually spits out his drink. "What?" "He's in the city. He was chasing down this slime villain guy, but then the slime guy found me and tried to take over my body." "Wait, what?" Chizome shrieks. Izuku ignores him and continues the story. But then All Might comes in and takes the guy out with a single punch. Izuku exclaims, practically jumping out of his shoes to rush over to the couch Chizome was relaxing on. "I would have died if he didn't come." "Why didn't you fight back?" Izuku stuck his tongue out. making a disgusted bleh noise. I couldn't reach for my weapons and I'm pretty sure I was dying. Wait. Chizome put a hand up. You said all mights in the city? He repeated, unsure if he heard Izuku correctly. Yes. Izuku threw his hands in the air. I wasn't able to ask why, but he is here. Chizome had to put down his tea in order to not spill it again. He put his hands together and brought it up to his lips. He was thinking. Sheet, Izuku, are you okay? Back to square one. Am I ever really okay? Izuku responds with a shrug. Okay, but seriously, I'm fine. If things had went differently and All Might didn't get there on time, I would've. Don't think about that, ya lil sheet. Chizome breathes out, wrapping a long arm around Izuku's shoulders. I'm glad you're okay. You've got to stop getting in trouble though. You're such a hypocrite. I'm a professional. They share a laugh which dies down quickly. With Izuku's adrenaline drained, the boy gets up. Oh. I'm gonna head to my room. Sure. Chizome picks up his half-empty cup from the table. I'm gonna make myself more tea. Izuku snorts. Yeah, okay. One rule in their household, you can never enter Izuku's room if the boy explicitly says, I'm going to my room. Because Izuku's room becomes scary when he's there, it's his space, he uses it to mumble, he draws lines over papers, scribbling on notebooks or yelling into his pillow. Izuku turned around to face the ceiling. His pillow had traces of tears from yelling and crying into them. He rested his head on the pillow and sighed. If he had managed to catch All Might, would the symbol of peace even acknowledge him? A quirkless nobody that's been associating with villains his entire life? If he had grabbed All Might, would it be slapping a sign with bold red letters on his face that says, Arrest me? Izuku understood why villains did things. The smarter ones had morals. A lot of them were rejected by society, so they had to work on the other side of the law. The dumber ones can go burn for all he cared. They were stupid and just hurt others for no reason. He understood why Chizome took up the role of the hero killer. His quirk pretty much explained it. No one was going to listen to some creepy guy saying that fake heroes should go burn in hell, so he acts. He only kills those who deserve it. Izuku brings his arms to his face and lays there for a while. Will I ever be more than I already am? What do I need to do? Who do I need to be? What will it take to change the world? Izuku. Izuku had fallen asleep on his side, his blanket was on the floor and his legs were sprawled in separate directions. He mumbled wordlessly, slightly opening an eye. Chizome was kneeling in front of him, hand shaking his shoulder to get him awake. What? Sheet, Izuku, come on, you need to see this. Chizome stands up from his position, holding his hand out for Izuku to take. The boy didn't need any help getting up from the bed, though his arms were quite sore and his throat was a bit dry, but took the hand anyway. Chizome led the drowsy boy into the living room where the news was shown on the TV. It didn't register right away, but Izuku's eyes went so wide Chizome thought they were going to pop when it did. There were explosions on the screen, there was fire and so much destruction. The cameraman was at a safe distance from the fight, but Izuku could see it. It was the slime villain, and he had caught somebody. I don't know if you've noticed, but look. Chizome points a finger and Izuku squints. He sees a glimpse of ash blonde hair and then there's more explosions. Oh sheet. Izuku repeats out loud. How had the villain escaped? That's your classmate, isn't it? Chizome hisses out stressfully. It isn't angry, more pitiful. It's not my thing, but I can take that slime guy out if... No, Izuku says immediately, I'm going. The boy grabs one of his favorite knives from inside a desk. He expects Chizome to protest, and for a second the man looks like he's about to smack Izuku across the face. Instead, he's given his go sign when Chizome nods. Go get him, but if you get hurt I'm going to kill you. And if I die? Izuku says as a joke. Walk it off. Chizome returns, I'm watching, stupid. If something goes wrong I'm going to intervene and everything will go to shit. Can't get much worse than it already is. Izuku finally pulls on his shoes and runs out the door. He knows exactly where the area is. Even from the building he can see the smoke in the sky and begins running to the source. Can't have good old Bakugo dying on him now. It seemed like a dumb move to let Izuku go, but Chizome let him anyway. Even if he wasn't the best, Izuku was improving. He needs some field work under his belt, and this wasn't the best scenario Chizome wanted to send him to, but he knew that his boy wouldn't stop bothering him until he gave permission. Izuku reminded Chizome a lot of Hisashi. Maybe a little bit more psychopathic than his father ever was, but they shared so many similarities. Smart, cunning, sometimes very decisive and very, very good with talking to people. Not on a social basis, but they could get what they want. Sometimes, Chizome wondered if Izuku somehow got a quirk that let him know how to jab at people with his words. Hesitantly, Chizome turned up the TV's volume just in time to hear the reporter yelling. The heroes appear to be immobilized by the situation. If any other pro heroes are watching, please come to their aid. The man's voice pauses. Wait. Who is that? Could that be another pro? Chizome catches a glimpse of dark green locks as a figure dives underneath the police tape and begins sprinting towards the slime villain. I don't recognize him. The reporter exclaims. Could this turn into a debut for a fresh face in the pro hero world? At that, Chizome laughs. Oh, they have no idea. There's another explosion, and then a scream. Chizome smiles. There we go. Izuku ran through fire and debris to get to the slime villain. The guy may have a large amount of sludge to spare, but Izuku moved fast enough to get to the part he couldn't spare. Flipping the knife in his hand to face the blade towards the villain, he stretched his arm forward and jabbed the BSRD in the right eye, earning an agonized scream that almost made Izuku giggle. The monster's grip on Bakugo loosened enough for the blonde to bring out a hand. He twisted it around, causing an explosion to the other eye. He did manage to see Izuku stick a knife into the guy's eye. Izuku sprung both his hands forward, wrapping them around Bakugo's torso and yanking him out of the monster's grip. There was resistance, but he managed to pull him away from the monster. The kid's out. One of the heroes yelled. It started a chain reaction, and soon enough, all the pro heroes at the scene jumped into action. One of them, a rescue-based one, Izuku recognized, helped the two middle schoolers away from the scene. That was wild. Izuku's heart was still pounding in his ears. He could see the pro hero, Origami or whatever, trying to talk to him. Her hair was colored pink, and despite it being tied up, there were numerous strands falling out of place. She was fumbling over her words, Izuku could tell. Eventually, she tried talking to Bakugo while the other heroes shoved the slime monster into restraints. More heroes arrived to put out the flames. Some of them herded away the civilians, and a cleanup team arrived. From the corner of Izuku's eye, he noticed a skeleton-looking blonde man leaning against a pole. His bright blue eyes underneath his sunken expression vaguely reminded him of someone. Sound finally returned to his ears, and the first thing he heard was Bakugo yelling at him. What the hell, Midoriya? He remembers my name. Huh, sorry, I saw it on the news and I couldn't stay away. Izuku replies, using his left hand to feel around his right forearm to check for his knife. I'm glad you're okay. I didn't need your effing help, useless sheet rag. Watch your language. Origami warns. Izuku didn't even notice she was still there. She was using her mutated foldable arms to lift away debris and set them aside, still keeping a close eye on the two students. Once things calm down and Izuku is chewed out by Kamui Woods and Deathgoro for jumping in and saving Bakugo, he's thankful that none of them really noticed that he pulled a knife when he attacked. The police ask him a few questions, paramedics check for injuries, and he's free to go. Gladly taking his chance, Izuku begins walking home, smiling. I'm so pathetic. Toshinori brings his hand to his mouth and coughs into it, warm blood dripping down from his fingers. He wiped it on the side of his breathes as he continues walking down an empty street. He had to watch two innocent bystanders suffer a villain attack because he was unable to go and save them. And while he was clutching onto his side in the back, the kid, the one with the knife, jumped into action and attacked the villain, just enough to get the other boy free and let the heroes capture the slime monster without getting anyone hurt. He's been looking for a successor for a while now. Somebody who can be a better hero than he can. He hasn't even considered Sir Nitai's suggestion up until now. He makes a dull turn to the street on his right and sees the other boy he had in mind, walking towards him. Even though the boy used a murder weapon in the midst of battle, Toshinori could see the potential, the conviction and the drive in his eyes that said, "I'm going to change the world." And plus, a weapon can either be used to kill or to save. It's almost like a quirk. Izuku was still pretty satisfied. He received a text from Chizome after he was allowed to go home by the police. Something about Chizome owing him a bowl of katsudon or something. Yeah, that put Izuku in a very good mood. He pulled his head forward to avoid letting his eyes wander and locked onto a figure ahead of him. The setting sun behind him produced a light that turned the figure into nothing more than a shadow, but Izuku could see that he was walking towards him. Another monster, perhaps? A colleague of the slime monster? When the man came into view, Izuku's eyes widened. It was the skeleton guy from just earlier. How'd he get here so fast? Hello. Izuku bows. I saw you earlier, at the villain attack? The man hesitated for a split second, but continued forward. Yeah, I was there. Did you want to tell me something? Yes, actually. The man brought his shiny blue eyes down to Izuku's right sleeve, where his knife had been so conveniently stowed. Your knife? I don't know what you're talking about. Izuku coughed. Had he not kept the knife properly? Was it sticking out in his sleeve? Izuku had to glance down and check. No, it's nothing bad. I just wanted to commemorate you. You were so brave earlier. The man continues. Even if you did use a knife, you did it for a good purpose. You saved that boy's life. He's my classmate. Izuku shrugs, not really understanding where this conversation was going. I couldn't just watch him die. At this, the skeleton man winces and Izuku raises an eyebrow. Are you a fan of All Might, my boy? Izuku nods immediately. Of course he was a fan of All Might. Everyone was a fan of All Might. Except maybe Endeavor and Shigaraki, but those two didn't matter. In the split second he blinks his eyes, the man in front of him turned huge. He's suddenly around 6 or 7 feet tall, bulging muscles covering his entire body, and the iconic V hairstyle was atop his head. All me might? Izuku stutters on the word, might, a couple times. He had definitely not been anticipating this. Where'd that skeleton guy go? Oh, don't tell me. Izuku leans to the side to see if the man was behind All Might. You're the skeleton guy? A puff of steam and the skeleton man is back. Tone down, my boy. Izuku. Midoriya. Ha. My name is Izuku Midoriya. The neutral position All Might's mouth has been in turned into a warm smile. He raised a sickly-looking hand and ruffled Izuku's hair teasingly, then removed the hand a second later. I'm going to tell you something very important, all right? Izuku's first thought was to say, yes, but he paused. Would that really be best? What if All for One extracted this knowledge from his head and used it to hurt All Might? He would never want that, but he wasn't sure if AFO had a quirk like that, but maybe he'll get one if he finds out about the things Izuku knows. All Might has a hand on the edge of his shirt. Izuku tilts his head. What's wrong? The blonde man lifts up his shirt slightly, revealing an absolutely gruesome hole in the man's left side. Izuku shudders at the sight, and to make matters worse, he knows who did that. 6 years ago, during a fight with a villain, he got me in the side, destroyed one of my lungs, and I lost my entire stomach. All Might tilts his head up to meet Izuku's eyes. It's not pretty, I know. Was that the fight with Toxic Chainsaw? Izuku blurted out, trying to make himself less suspicious, but of course it wasn't the fight with Toxic Chainsaw. That crazed BS could turn his limbs into literal chainsaws. He usually coated them in poison when he fought against people solely for the purpose of killing his opponents. Izuku knows this. He knows a lot. You remembered that fight? All Might muses, but then sighs and shakes his head. Close, but no, I kept this fight out of the media. Izuku remembered that day. Chizome got a call from Kurogiri, and while they were talking about All for One's critical condition, he and Shigaraki were texting each other. Shigaraki was so mad, he said he wanted to grab All Might by the throat until the man was nothing but dust while the hero was still recovering from the fight. Now then, All Might continues, because of this injury I can only maintain my hero form for up to 3 hours. He explains, holding up 3 bony fingers. That's why I was in such a rush earlier today, I'm sorry. Izuku can only nod. And finally, what do you think my quirk is? Izuku stutters wordlessly for a moment before saying, I think most of the world is convinced that your quirk is an incredibly powerful version of strength augmentation. Yeah, I've heard that. Oh my god, all might read fan theories, but to tell you the truth? He holds out his hand towards Izuku. There's a glow and several different colors streaming from his palm. It's called One for All. And Izuku already knows chapter text. One for all. Izuku repeats, his eyes fixated onto All Might's hand. It looks so appealing, so much more than all for one. How does it work? My power is one for the ages. All Might folds his outstretched hand into a fist. One for All is a torch passed down from generation to generation, and with every new holder it only gets more powerful. It feels so different to hear someone else explain the power to him. All for One makes it sound so scary, All Might makes it sound so amazing. Each holder is responsible for choosing a successor. All Might makes sure to look straight into Izuku's eyes. And I deem you worthy of inheriting my quirk. Well, shit. Toshinori hoped that Izuku would take this situation better than the boy currently is. He's dumbstruck, a face of pure shock and confusion, nothing more. Midoriya seemed like a very intelligent boy, that alone would be a very good matchup with One for All. Speaking of quirks, Toshinori hadn't even asked the boy about his. I'm not going to force this on you. Toshinori stifles a chuckle, but he sees the boy visibly wince. Are you alright? Peachy. Midoriya seethes, it's just. Are you sure you want to give this power to me? The way he addresses himself makes it sound like he hates himself. I'm sure there are other people that can fit your image better than I ever can. But I don't want them to fit my image. Toshinori says, shaking his head, the next holder will be 10 times better than I ever was, and my boy, believe me, you're perfect for the role. I'm quirkless. The green-haired boy blurts. Izuku hoped that if he revealed his quirkless status, All Might would change his mind. Despite that, though, the symbol of peace persisted. Quirkless? Well, that's even better. It just means that your body will be able to adapt to One for All so much easier. He can't accept One for All. But it sounded so promising. He could do so much with a power like that. He could do so much with a power like All for One too. Izuku bit his lip. What would Chizome say? Could he even tell Chizome? There was so much he was leaving to pure chance alone. It wasn't the way he liked to do things, but he couldn't calculate of what was to come. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, the turning point in his life. This was his chance to change. Was change what he wanted, though? Yes. Izuku suddenly exclaimed, I'll do it. All Might smiled. Great. You know that one beach nearby? Dagoba? The one filled with the washed-up trash. Yeah. Meet me there tomorrow morning, we'll talk more. The hero lifted his hand and playfully ruffled Izuku's curls again. Now get home, I'm sure your parents are worried. Sure. Izuku nods, his heart was beating out of his chest. He walks past All Might's skeleton-like form, holding his breath until he's a good distance from the man, a habit he's formed due to all the emotions he's bottled up. And then he cries. Chizome was getting pretty impatient. He was waiting on the couch, waiting for door to open or at least a knock. It's been a good hour and a half since Izuku had left to go save his classmate, and he hasn't come back. Where the hell is that kid? Well, at least this gave him more time to think on what he was going to say to the boy. He had to tell Izuku eventually, might as well do it while he's still pretty young. Home. Chizome could have sworn he didn't even hear the door open, but Izuku was standing next to him by the time he sees the boy and he was crying. Izuku hasn't come home crying since he was a small kid. Sheet, what happened? You did really good, kid. You saved him. It's not that. Izuku had his fists clenched, his knuckles turning white. Maybe this wasn't the best time to talk to him about this. No, he needed to know. If you're good to talk, I need to tell you something. Chizome moved aside, allowing space for Izuku to sit on. The boy glanced at the empty cushion but shook his head, using his sleeves to wipe away remaining tears. I actually needed to tell you something too. Chizome furrowed his eyebrows. Sheet, did Izuku find out? No, he couldn't have. Chizome did everything he could to cover up everything about Izuku's past family. Whatever he tells the kid is all the kid will ever know. I think what I have to say is more important. Izuku shakes his head again. God, Chizome hated seeing the boy like this. All shaken up and afraid, he had gotten so used to the eerie smile on the other's lips. It's about your dad, Izuku. The green-haired boy stopped his pointless crying at once. He was still wiping away the remnants, but the ugly sobbing had stopped at this point. You listening? Izuku nods. Your father and I were good friends. Chizome starts calmly. He was a good man with good motives, he just needed someone to help him out. He then pointed to himself with a finger, and me. Izuku nods, his arms dropped to the side and it was obvious he was listening. You'll find pictures of me, most are blurry and don't really look like me, but a lot of them can date back to 15 years ago. The man stared at Izuku for a moment, slightly raising an eyebrow. I had the attention of our operation on me, it was just me, I was the one playing judge, jury and executioner. Izuku never liked one-sided conversations, but he didn't want to interrupt Chizome, especially since what he was talking about was so interesting, but then again Izuku was going to receive All Might's quirk. What could be more important than that? What the public didn't know was that there was another man. Chizome points to Izuku, your father. Oh shit. Right. Chizome makes a noise similar to a chuckle. Nobody would believe it, innocent old Hisashi Midoriya? Responsible for the deaths of all those pro-heroes? Not likely. Everything else was silent. It was like the world had stopped to listen. Your father was the one who chose all the ones who had to die. He played the judge and jury. All those times? I remembered I would have to sleep alone, because my father was always gone. Izuku gasps, God, he felt like crying again, all those times. He was meeting up with you? Yep. Chizome hums, he was ridiculously good at thinking of plans and sheet, he picked at the weak spots on pro-heroes, he can watch a few videos about them and he'll have a plan that's bound to succeed. He had a good eye to spot weaknesses. Is there a reason you're telling me this? Because I think my thing is kinda imp. Zip it, I'm not done. Chizome puts two fingers together and moves it in one direction. Your father told me that he wanted to see the day when you grew up to continue his legacy as the judge. Wait. So, from now on, you're gonna learn how to be the judge. Okay, Izuku was gonna go throw up now. The second Chizome let the words out, there was a tint of shock in Izuku's eyes before the boy literally passed out. His knees buckled and his face slammed straight into the floor, creating a painful thud. What the hell, Izuku? Chizome bolted to his feet. Usually he would have been fast enough to catch the boy if he fell, but he assumed that Izuku was just making false play. He didn't expect him to actually hit the floor. He bent down and wrapped his arms around Izuku's shoulders, yanking him upwards. The boy was out cold, like he was FING shot or something. He was breathing at least, so he wasn't shot. Chizome was tall enough to lift Izuku right off the floor with ease. He set the unconscious boy on the couch inside. Well, whatever. The kid needed to rest anyway. He left the boy and went into the kitchen. He looked over some ingredients that would make a decent dinner, before hissing and deciding to get more takeout. When he returned to the couch to ask Izuku about dinner, the boy was gone. Something flipped within Chizome and he was about to go on a rampage to hunt down the boy, but the phone in his pocket began ringing. He angrily picked it up. Good evening, Agakuro Chizome. Kurojairi. Chizome hissed. Where did you take him? Him is such a vague term. He heard Shigaraki snicker in the back. He had to stop himself from forcefully crushing the device in his hands. Where did you take Izuku? Chizome demanded, using one hand to keep the phone to his ear while the other to gather his weapons and strap on the rest of his gear. He was going to give these bestiards hell if they think they could take his boy without consequences. He's right here. Kurojairi mumbles. Sensei says you need to come get him. Like hell I will. Chizome shoves his katana into its sheath, swinging the strap over his torso. Great. Shigaraki chimes, see you soon. The call was cut, and Stain was angry. The first thing Izuku expected was the floor, but he subconsciously felt his body being lifted up, Then he felt the sickening feeling of being warped by Kurogiri. Finally, he awoke tied up in a chair. F you. Hello to you too, Izuku. Izuku looked around the room. He was in the bar, obviously. Take me home. No can do, broccoli head. Shigaraki tuts, shaking his head slightly. We need to talk to Stain, and he'd never come if you weren't here. Izuku scowls at how casual the teen in front of him sounds. He likes Shigaraki, he's a bit of a brat but Izuku can't deny the brother-like bond the two of them shared. Sometimes Izuku wonders if Shigaraki's purposely pulling their relationship apart. While we're waiting, I think Sensei wants to talk to you. After being warped again, Izuku is brought in front of All for One. It's as dark as usual, but the man in front of him is noticeably closer than usual. A lot closer. All for One reaches forward, untying Izuku from the chair. Have you thought about it? Yes. Izuku replies softly, rubbing his wrists absent-mindedly. Did you tell anyone? A moment of hesitation, then, yes. Chizome. No one else. As expected. All for One leans back into his chair. Izuku mimics him. See? This is why I want to entrust this power to you, Izuku. I know you. Could I go home now? Then All for One pauses. He stops his idle hand movements. He stares at Izuku. Oh. Yeah, I'm tired. Izuku expresses a yawn. I think. A lot has happened today. Care to elaborate? So he doesn't know. I almost died. Really now? All for One muses. I thought your interaction with that slime quirk user was going quite well. That is, until an unknown factor interrupted you. Izuku swallows. I was dying, slowly and painfully. A hero came in and did his job. Which hero? No one special, I accidentally stabbed them though. Then All for One chuckles. You didn't kill them, I assume? Nope, hit them in the shoulder. What else? Well, got home, talked to Chizome. He mentioned something about my dad? Your father? Izuku. Probably shouldn't have said that. He reeled back, dragging his eyes to look at All for One. Yes. Interesting. Was all the man said, leaning back once again, putting his hands together. A few beats of silence before he hummed, Ah, seems like Chizome is here to pick you up. Please tell him I said hello. When Izuku was dropped out of All for One's black portals, his mouth fell open when he saw Kurogiri limply laying across the bar counter, and Chizome, dressed up in his killing uniform, standing on top of a fallen Shigaraki. Kid! Chizome exclaimed through grit teeth, get over here. Izuku wasted to no time complaining and waddled over to Chizome's side. He glanced down at Shigaraki, who was paralyzed by Chizome's quirk. His red eyes were staring right up at Izuku. The boy covered his mouth to hide another smile. I told you business to never touch him. Chizome growled, bringing up his blade and pointing it at Shigaraki's throat. I'd kill you right now if I wanted to. Then do it. Shigaraki managed to gurgle out, a strained hiss leaving his chapped lips. Go on. Izuku watched intently, half waiting for the sound of the blade piercing flesh, but the other half wanted to just leave, go home and forget about this. Chizome pulled his hand back, ready to drive the blade straight into the shriveled teen's throat. Shigaraki's hand suddenly shot forward, gripping the blade. The metal weapon rusted and decayed in a matter of seconds. With another growl, Chizome stomped his foot onto Shigaraki's stomach. The teen would have curled up in pain if it hadn't been for his body recovering from the paralysis. Stay the F away from Izuku. With those final words, Chizome got off and went outside, making sure Izuku followed him. They walked a few blocks away from the bar. Chizome was still on edge until they finally traveled a decent distance. It wasn't like they were going to take a train while Chizome was dressed like that. It was dark out. Why didn't you kill him? Chizome looked over to the teen next to him. Shigaraki, Izuku repeated. Why didn't you kill Shigaraki? The taller, gaunt man beside Izuku smiled. Because I'll wait for the day to see you do it yourself. Izuku woke with a bitter taste in his mouth. He rubbed his eyes and sat up from his bed. The room was still dark, but Izuku could see the sun beginning to rise over the buildings, but it was faint. He swung his legs out of bed, then standing up and pulling on a shirt that dangled from the side of his bed. It was a plain white t-shirt that had "All M" in bold black letters. He left the apartment silently, taking his keys on the way out. The beach wasn't far, just a brief jog, weaving through the suburbs until he stumbled onto the trash-covered beach. There were entire machines like televisions and refrigerators scattered around, but in the midst of it all stood the skeleton man. "All Might," Izuku whispered, unsure if he was seeing him correctly. The skeleton turned his head. "Midoriya, my boy. I was wondering when you would show up." He stepped forward, looking down to the boy's shirt. "I like your shirt." Izuku felt blush dusting his cheeks. "Thanks." "All right, let's get started." The man clapped his hands together, his form suddenly turning into a large mass of muscles. He reached for a bag, pulling out a clump of rope and swinging it around a giant fridge. Izuku watched curiously. All Might secured the rope around the broken appliance, then climbed on top. What? "Go get that rope, kid." All Might encourages. Izuku, despite still being confused, walked forward, picking up the rope. "Go on." Izuku tried the rope around his hands, then tugged. "Holy CRP. Watch that language, young Midoriya." Why are you having me do this again?" "Ha!" All Might exclaims. "You think you can just accept one for all? You're not ready." Izuku felt his heart sink to his stomach. He felt betrayed, he felt cheated, and it must have shown, because All Might continued, "Don't get me wrong, kid. Your attitude and mind are perfect, but your body isn't. And if you tried to accept my quirk like this, then your arms and legs would blast off." And suddenly Izuku felt very discouraged. All Might let out a broad laugh. "Did you know this place used to look appealing?" Despite his sullen tone, his voice would still boom and his smile did not falter. Izuku nods. "Yeah, because of the tides a lot of trash washed up here. Then more people decided to contribute. He began throwing their trash here." All Might sticks out his hand in a thumbs up. "Right? So, what we're going to do to get you prepared?" The symbol of peace leaps down from his spot on the fridge. Izuku takes a step back. "Is get rid of all." He takes a moment to pause, crushing the fridge with a single hand. "This trash. That sounds like a lot of work." Izuku tries to cover nervousness with a forced laugh. All Might nods. Walking over to the boy, he reaches behind his pocket. He digs around for a bit, then pulls out a few crumpled up papers. "I've designed an entire training regimen for you." All Might hands the mess of papers to Izuku. "If I'm being honest, this is going to be super hard. You still up for it?" Izuku schemes through the papers. He liked to think he was in an okay physical state. He tried believing he could survive this, but his brain began thinking ahead and somehow stumbled onto the possibility that he'll be crushed by one of the things he'll be carrying. "What are the chances of me dying?" "Huh." Izuku cleared his throat. Judging by how am I now, what are the chances I'm going to, succeed?" All Might hums for a moment, a sudden puff of smoke, and he's suddenly replaced by his skeletal form. "You have a good heart, Izuku Midoriya," the blonde says assuringly. "You have all of my support. I truly believe you can do it." Izuku nods. There's a warm swelling in his chest. He feels proud and he smiles pleasantly. "Okay. Great. Let's get to work." And thus began the next 10 months of absolute hell. What made it worse was the fact that All Might's training wasn't the only thing beating his but around like a rag doll chapter text. For 10 whole months, Izuku's schedule consisted of this. Wake up at 3 a.m. to meet All Might at the beach to clear out some trash. On his best days he could get rid of a pile or two. Then by 6 a.m. he rushed home and ate breakfast with Chizome. It was mostly carbs in order for Izuku to regain his energy. Then while on his way to school, Chizome assigned him to take notes. Didn't matter if they were mental or he wrote them down onto a phone or a notebook, as long as he made sure to observe the smallest things in his surroundings. It was most likely a way to sharpen his critical thinking skills. For the first few weeks, he wrote down the people he often saw on the train, taking note on their quirks if ever he saw any. He didn't talk to any of them to ask about it. He considered that to be cheating. Keen observation was the key to this exercise. He got through school, as the months passed he grew more and more sluggish with his academics. Then by 4 p.m. he boarded a train and was on his way back. He took a few more notes. Then he would swing by his apartment, drop off his notebook if Chizome wasn't there, then he would jog to the beach to clear out more trash. He'd finish that by 8 p.m., come home, eat dinner, then study for actual school, then hit the hay, completely and utterly exhausted. It was difficult but possible. Izuku was currently dressed in a comfortable gray jacket and sweatpants. He was trailing behind All Might in a steady jog. His mentor, or one of them at least, was standing on a Segway, comfortably dressed in a brown trench coat and a scarf wrapped around his neck. It hid up his skeletal form casually. Constantly, Izuku's eyes were drifting around attentively. He muttered to himself breathlessly. If All Might had noticed, he probably didn't want to question why his soon-to-be successor was saying, "There's a bird in that tree. Judging by how much noise it's making, it's probably the trying to attract a mate. I saw a cat sleeping under a patch of sunlight and I've ended 17 leaves fall since we started this jog." Talking while exercising proved to be a troublesome task. The more Izuku muttered to himself, the more air he lost from his lungs. He didn't pay much attention to how numb his body felt. His shoulders ached with tension, the area underneath his right rib cage was sore, his ankles were stiff and his hips kept locking in place. Halfway through the jog, he missed his footing on his left foot and fell. The impact felt so much worse than he anticipated. It felt like his ribs were just shattered. He tried catching himself with his arm, but the limb gave way and his face smacked straight onto the leaf-covered floor. He tried getting back up, but now that his body had finally had a taste of some kind of rest, it refused to get back up. He let out a soft profane word, chiding himself. "Are you all right, young Midoriya?" Izuku managed to turn his head a bit to see All Might bending down towards him. "Look really bad." "I've noticed." Izuku grumbles, trying to move his arms to get up again. "You're overworked." All Might suddenly says, "I made that regimen specifically for you. If your body is this exhausted, then that means you're doing something that you aren't telling me." "Maybe." Izuku tries to shrug. "I'm just tired." "By overworking your body, you're getting the opposite of our ultimate goal," All Might tuts, shaking his head. "Here, take my hand." Izuku reaches up. All Might pulls the boy to his feet and begins brushing off the leaves that stuck themselves onto Izuku's clothes. "It'd be a lot better if you told me you're doing some extra training at home, so I could at least adjust the regimen." It's complicated. It really was, because Chizome's training was erratic. At the most random times, Izuku could just be reading his notes and Chizome would burst through the door with a knife, and Izuku was forced to defend himself with anything he had in the room. The funniest match had to be when Izuku used a paper plane as a weapon. Other times, Izuku would be relaxing on the couch and eating dinner, then Chizome would run in through the door, smelling like blood and death, then would demand that Izuku get on the floor and do a varying amount of push-ups. They can range from 10 to 100. Well, if you can't tell me, then please try to do your best to maintain a healthy well-being. All Might requests, "I'd be devastated to hear if something happened to you, my boy." The hero pats Izuku on the back. He wobbles slightly, but All Might gently keeps him upright. "That'll be enough for today. I want you to head home and rest." Izuku tilts his head and is about to object. "Don't say anything. Go home, young Midoriya. The exam is only a few days from now." Hesitantly, Izuku nods. The two part ways, but All Might insists that he stays by the boy's side until he gets home. There was absolutely no way Izuku was about to rat out Chizome's secret base. He tells All Might that his apartment is incredibly far, so the hero reluctantly lets his student go, watching the green-haired boy run off. Izuku had to take the long way home to make sure he loses All Might, and while on his path he encounters a guy. He has black hair. It's not that long but it's flattened down. The guy is leaning against the wall, and Izuku's concern rises. He taps the guy on the shoulder and he spins around. His jaw is slightly open and Izuku sees a row of sharp, white teeth. "Sorry for bothering, but are you okay?" Izuku asks, his concern showing through furrowed brows and a tone in his voice. "Oh no." The guy says, "I'm fine." "Are you lost then?" The guy shakes his head. "Nah, nothing like that. Something just happened." "What did?" "There was a villain attack," the guy explains. I was right there and I couldn't even move. I couldn't save the people that were being attacked. Are they okay? Yeah, my other classmates rushed in and scared the villain off. She's pretty cool. Well, alright. Izuku says with a shrug, then he begins to walk past the guy. He didn't want to seem rude and press for more information. Just as he leaves though, he turns around with a smile. It's alright to be afraid, but heroes are always risking their lives, so if you want to become one, just do your best. The guy nods, though there's a confused glint in his eyes. It was later on covered by a determined shine. A fiery conviction sparked within his pupils. That's pretty inspirational, dude. No problem. I believe in you. Izuku chuckles, waving a goodbye as he walks off. The guy stands straight and puffs out his chest and marches the other way. Strangely enough, Izuku gets a feeling of déjà vu when he pulls the exact same tactic he did a few months ago. Taking the long way, passing by the same street where he encountered the timid, black-haired boy. Except this time nobody was there. Izuku was midway through finishing one of his assigned meals from All Might's training regimen. He glances up and sees Chizome staring at him questioningly. What? Izuku says, still chewing on a piece of meat. Are you going anywhere later? You've been disappearing lately, don't think I don't notice. Chizome grumbles, using his chopsticks to bring up a few noodles to his mouth. I know I've been kinda rough with you, with my surprise attacks and stuff. Chizome put me down. This is a life or death experience. You either escape my grasp or I drop you off the F roof. It's 2M. Why are you doing this? Not that. Izuku says, taking another chunk of meat. Then what? There's this guy. Izuku states, he started training me 10 months ago, so other than you, he's helping me train for the UA entrance exam. Why? Because I don't want to make an absolute fool of myself. Fair enough. They continue eating casually. Chizome took the I'm being secretly trained by some random stranger you've never met before story a lot better than Izuku expected. It would have been worse if he told him he was being trained under the #1 hero to reach a physique that's perfect enough to control a quirk powerful enough to topple over cities and destroy the world. I'm gonna go out. Chizome clears his throat and speaks. I was gonna wait until after the exams, but something came up. And you're telling me why? You're coming with me, smartus. Ha! It's a father and son bonding experience, except there's more knives involved. Chizome announces, slurping up the remains of his dinner. It won't be long, maybe an hour or two. We're heading to the outskirts of the city. You're lucky it's a Friday. I wouldn't agree to this if you asked me any other day of the week. Izuku mumbles, munching on the last piece of meat he had in his bowl. How man? 2, they're a duo, twins if I'm correct. Chizome shrugs, they're pretty fresh, but they have so many flaws it'd be better to rid them before they get worse. Okay, cool. Izuku replied nonchalantly. He stood up and brought his bowl to the sink. He filled it with some water and left it there, turning back to Chizome. What's the plan? It was night and Izuku's schedule was a mess. He was supposed to be asleep by now, and the exhaustion from the day training was getting to him. He tried keeping up with Chizome as they traveled on the rooftops, undetected by most people. Izuku was wearing a jacket for 2 reasons. It was cold and he had at least 7 knives tucked into the pockets of the garment. Chizome was less dressed for a stealth mission. His toned body was dressed in his iconic stain uniform. The ends of his dirty cream bandana and dark red scarf were flying around behind him. Izuku landed on top of their destination with his ankles jarring in place. Chizome was hunched over the edge of the building. He was scanning the scene below them. 2 people were standing at the base of the holding, talking with each other. From what Izuku could see, one was dressed in black and the other was dressed in white, like they were polar opposites. That's them. Chizome hisses, I'm going to get the drop on them. He turns around and points a blade at Izuku. Get down there, you'll act as bait. What? No. Izuku objects, crossing his arms. There's no way I'm going to play the victim here. It's either you do that or I'm gonna drop you off this roof. No. At the end of it, Izuku found himself walking down the stairs of the apartment complex building that they had been standing on. He exited out the front door, getting a glance from the hero dressed in white. They waved at Izuku and the one dressed in black simply blinked at him. Izuku heard of these too. Once, they called themselves Dusk and Dawn. He wasn't entirely sure what their quirks were, but they can't be that troublesome. He slid past the duo and walked into the alleyway next to the building. He looked up and saw Chizome glaring down at him. After taking a deep breath, Izuku let out a blood-curdling scream. Chizome ducked out of view. The two heroes ran into the alley to check on the green-haired boy. "Are you all right?" The one in white. He has half a mask on his face, it's curved round his jaw and it's colored a light shade of blue. "Did something happen?" Izuku looks around nervously. Chizome did not specify when he was going to attack. Izuku stammers on the first phrase, the words coming out as nothing but random babbling. Dusk looks angry, he crosses his arms and scoffs. Dawn, he's probably in shock. Hey. Dawn says, placing a hand on Izuku's shoulder, "Listen to me, breathe in for 4 seconds. The hero instructs carefully, Izuku follows, hold it in for 7 seconds and then let it out for 8 seconds. It'll help." It actually does help. Izuku decides to keep the breathing pattern in mind for future purposes. He keeps breathing for a few more minutes, eyes locked on the floor. He can see a shadow descending from the entrance of the alleyway and he holds his breath, screwing his eyes shut. "Hey, what's?" When Izuku looks up, he sees the white uniform of the hero turn red. His eyesight goes black, but instead of standing helplessly, Izuku acts. He takes out one of his knives and drives it into Dusk's stomach. The hero dressed in black lets out a grunt, using his elbow to strike Izuku in the head. Izuku twists the knife then pulls it out, tossing it aside for Chizome to take. His eyesight clears and once the hero killer gets his hands on the bloodied knife, Dusk's limbs lock in place and he falls onto one knee. He's panicking, he's bleeding and he's scared. "Dawn!" Dusk calls out, unable to move his head, but Izuku can see his pupils moving back and forth, desperately trying to find his brother. "Dawn, please. Get up, you can't die." "Not here, brother." Chizome shoots forward and uses the handle of his katana to hit Dusk at the back of his head, as payback for how he had hit Izuku earlier. The green-haired boy looks up and finds Dawn leaning against the wall. He's breathing heavily, his hands is pressed against his bleeding shoulder. Izuku can see him trembling. He smiles. 4, 7, right? Izuku stretches his arm forward and sticks the end of his knife against Dawn's throat. The hero helplessly lets it happen, gritting his teeth. Just a kid? Why are you? Bold of you to make assumptions like that." Izuku hums, "I have a question, you up for answering?" Dawn wasn't exactly in the position to say no. "What's your quirk called?" "I don't think I remember the name being published." "We call it Night and Day." Dawn replies in a strained voice, "I control light and he controls darkness." He tries moving his head forward to directly face Izuku, but his joints are still frozen in place. He was trying to use his quirk, but tragically failing. "Ah, I see." Izuku nods understandingly. That must have been why it became so dark earlier when he attacked Dusk. He makes sure to make a mental note and presses the knife closer. "Well, that'll be all. Glad to meet you." The knife sinks in and Dusk screams. When they return back to the apartment, it was a pretty long walk. It's already hit the news that the hero killer strikes again. Izuku rolls his eyes at the TV, opting to SW's channels. Almost every news channel was covering the story of how the uprising hero duo were horribly killed. Chizome's uniform is laying across a table. Izuku had neatly folded it up earlier after Chizome had ditched it on the floor in front of the bathroom door. Izuku tilts his head back to check the clock. It's already 5 a.m. He should be at the beach with All Might at this time. Wait, he should be at the beach with All Might. Izuku scrambles to his feet. He'd changed his clothes earlier, so he runs out the door after putting on his signature red shoes. He runs to the beach hurriedly, afraid that he had kept All Might waiting there for so long. When he's near enough, Izuku's chest wells up at the sight of the trash on the beach. A lot of it has disappeared since he first started months ago. He's kinda proud of that. When he gets there, All Might is sitting on top of a microwave. He's wrapped comfortably in winter clothing, his bony hands covered by cute gloves. The blonde man perks up and waved at Izuku as he approaches. The green-haired boy bows deeply. "I'm so sorry for being late." I lost track of time and didn't realize that Hey now. It's all right, my boy. All Might interrupts, raising his covered hands. I was actually about to tell you to stay home. Something terrible happened earlier, and I didn't want to risk you getting hurt. Izuku's still breathing, but he finally stands up straight and tilts his head to the side. What happened? You haven't heard? No. A vigilante, or at least he calls himself one, named the Stain managed to get his swords on a pair of heroes. All Might says sullenly, if he keeps at it, they might call in a pro-hero team to stop him. Oh. Izuku frowns, I hope he gets captured soon. Yes, I hope so too. All Might agrees, well, since you're here now, let's get some trash out of the way. The UA entrance exam took place on a Monday. At the rate Izuku was removing trash, he probably wouldn't have been able to get rid of everything. Yet much to Toshinori's surprise, when he walks up to the beach on the final day of their training, he finds it completely devoid of any kind of trash. The water is peacefully washing up against the shoreline, the sand looks nice and soft. And Izuku Midoriya is nowhere to be seen. So, Chizome leans against the doorway that lead to Izuku's room. You decided to change courses? Not gonna watch him see Splody anymore. Izuku is currently shoving notebooks and pens into his bag. He zips it closed and stands up straight. Okay, there's no way I'm gonna survive the practical exam without a quirk, and of course I'm gonna watch Bakugo. Just from a safe distance. Sounds like a plan. Chizome comments knowingly. You'll do great, kid. Go F up the other guy's sheet. Izuku gives a determined thumbs up, slinging the bag over his shoulder. Chizome leads the boy to the door, opening it up and watching his son walk out of the apartment. Izuku waves, just as he disappears down the stairs. He takes a train that brings him to UA's gates, which was incredibly convenient. Of course it was directly in front of the school, but very close by. When Izuku gets down from the train, he notices a few more teenagers around his age also exit the train. Some are in groups and a few of them are walking alone. One catches his eye quickly. He has spiky red hair, not spiky like Bakugo's, but it stands up right and looks pretty solid. Even from a distance, Izuku can see how the boy carries himself. He moves with a purpose and it's exhilarating. It's pretty safe to assume that the redhead would be trying for the heroics course, but Izuku can't quite make out what his quirk is. They are heading in the same direction, so there was no harm in starting up a little conversation. He approaches the redhead and taps his shoulder. The other boy turns around and, oh, it's you. Holy Siri. Izuku tilts his head, his brain registers the noticeable features of the boy next to him. A light scar on his right eye and the sharp teeth in his mouth. Oh, it's you. They exchange a laugh and the redhead grasps Izuku's shoulders. It's been months. How are you? Sounds like I should be the one asking you. What did you do with your hair? Izuku asks. He was honestly very baffled to see a bright red in place of the black hair from before. Looks really good. Thank you. I changed it up because I wanted to look more eye-catching. I also threw away my old self. I'm the better version of myself. The faux redhead exclaims, bumping his fists together with a satisfying thud. It's thanks to you. How? Izuku asks. He moves slightly to the left to avoid getting hit by the hanging limbs of another student walking down the path to UA. I can't really explain. It's just, yeah. It's all right, I won't press. Izuku smiles and the redhead beams. My name is Edru Kirishima, by the way. I'm Izuku Midoriya, at your service. They continue on a simple conversation about heroes. Kirishima reveals that his favorite hero is one from a few years ago, Crimson Riot. Izuku simply replies that he's a huge fan of All Might. They keep going until it eventually evolves into Izuku continuously rambling about how awesome All Might is. Their conversation unfortunately pulls to a stop when they reach a fork in a hallway. One leads to the auditorium for the heroics written exam briefing and the others leads to the written exam for the other courses. Kirishima begins walking towards the right hallway, but Izuku holds him by the shoulders. I can't wait to see you become a great hero, Kirishima. Huh. Kirishima tilts his head and raises an eyebrow. I'll be watching from the support department. When you want to send in your hero costume design, send them to me. I'll add some improvements. Kirishima's jaw drops. You're not going to heroics? Nope. You're like the manliest, most heroic person I've met. You're super cool. Kirishima wails exasperatedly. If I may ask, aren't you going to heroics? Well. Izuku hums, scratching the back of his head. To put it simply, I'm quirkless. And? Kirishima intervenes. There's nothing wrong with that. A hero can be anyone. He argues, a determined tone in his voice, though a quirk would be helpful. Before Izuku can think, he blurts, not me. Izuku shouldn't have talked so much. He let Kirishima crawl under his skin, even if it was without bad intention. Izuku can't be a hero, not after he willingly killed someone just the other night. The green-haired boy hangs his head. I'll, get going. Good luck in the exam. The entrance exam for the support course was relatively simple. They set you in a room and gave you a tray of random parts and trinkets. On the wall were a variety of tools. The first task was to create a support item for a certain hero. Izuku was assigned to the hot-headed hero, Wildfire. They showed him a video of how the pro hero operated and the general information of their quirk. Could I get some gas here? Izuku asks through the one-way mirror. The speaker is silent for a moment, but then it beeps and asks, what kind? Izuku grins. A moment later 2 tanks of propane slide into the room and Izuku yanks them back to his tables. He picks up a few pieces of metal from the table. There are tubes hanging from underneath. He links them to the gas tanks and transfers the contents to a few canisters he found in a cabinet. He sniffs the air and picks up the scent of the gas. A few puffs of it must have escaped, but it wasn't much. Once it was filled up, he clicks it together with a chain and locks it around his waist. And what have you created, Izuku Midoriya? Wildifire's quirk isn't very versatile. With this, he shows off the cans hanging from the makeshift belt. She can cause wide-range attacks by spreading the propane in an area and using her quirk to blow it up. He may or may not have drawn inspiration from a certain explosive blonde. More silence fills the room, then there's a buzzer. Thank you, Midoriya. We will send this idea to Wildfire and if she approves, we will contact you to rebuild the support gear for real. The voice pauses and a door slides open. That will be all. We will contact you when. The speaker is cut off and there's a loud explosion from another room. Izuku almost thinks that somehow Bakugo was there, but he was proven wrong when another door opened. Smoke was pushed out and a girl with long, pink hair walks out of the room with a huge grin on her face. Who? Did not expect my baby to blow up like that. She exclaims, rubbing away at the spot on her face. She turns her head and makes eye contact with Izuku. Her bright, yellow eyes narrow onto Izuku and he shudders. Ooh, hello. She waves excitedly. Are you also trying for the support course? Izuku smiles weakly, nodding. Hatsune, please return to your room. You're disturbing other examinees. Whoa, are those gas tanks? Hatsune zooms to Izuku's table, getting on one knee and running her hand on the side of the tank. Her nose twitches and she exclaims, oh, that's why my baby blew up. Some of the propane from this room must have escaped. Sorry about that. Izuku says, bowing his head slightly. Hatsune rushes to him and pats him on the back. Don't worry about it, Freckles. I'll teach you how to properly transfer gas if we both get into UA. The pink-haired girl says, giving Izuku a thumbs up. Hatsune, once again, please return to your room. You are disturbing. I got it. Hatsune waves to Izuku, escaping back through the door and re-entering her testing room. Izuku smiles slightly. Maybe the support course would be just as good as heroics. Tenya Ida had accumulated at least 47 points in the exam. It should be enough to at least pass. He wasn't aiming for passing marks though. He wants to do the best he can. He helps people who have stumbled or get stuck under the robots that they've destroyed. He's helped a blonde stranger earlier to get back onto his feet after he found him gripping his stomach and leaning against the wall. Near the end of the exam, the earth rumbles and the people around him are looking around frantically, trying to find the source of the violent vibrations. When they look up, Their eyes settle on the absolutely massive hunk of metal that towers above them. The zero-pointer. An obstacle that costs nothing, and it's huge. As expected, the examinees begin fleeing to find targets they can actually take down. Ida is about to run away too, but then he hears a scream. It belongs to a girl. She's crying out for help. Ida turns around and sees her trapped under rubble. Her lower body is being crushed and she can't get up. She's reaching out for someone to save her. The robot moves closer and closer, and Ida realizes it's not going to stop. I have to help, Ida thinks, but his legs are frozen in fear. It was like the engines in his calves were trapped in ice. Then he hears the sound of a sickening crack and a loud scream. The robot stops moving and Present Mic's loud voice booms over the speakers, signaling the end of the exam. Ida runs to the girl. She's sobbing in a pool of blood. Her legs appear to be nothing more than a broken mess of limbs. He begins pushing off the rubble, saying things like, "It's okay. You're okay. You're not dead yet, Mississippi. Please stay awake." The girl, she looks so small underneath the mess. Her brown hair is messed up, there are tear tracks on his round cheeks and her eyes are trying to focus through the tears. He finally kicks off the last of the ruble and lifts her up. Carefully. People begin surrounding, but Ida yells at them to clear out so he can place the girl he's carrying on a cleared area safe from any damage. He sets her down gently, but he doesn't dare to look at her legs. Recovery girl, the school's nurse, approaches, using her stick to push away crowding students. She does not falter at the sight of the injured girl. Instead, she moves closer and presses a kiss to her forehead. The limbs begin twisting back into place. The girl cries out, then her head collapses onto the floor. Recovery girl sighs. She raises her walking stick thing and waves it in the air. A few more adults rush in. They appear to be a paramedic team. They lift the girl onto the white stretcher and rush her out of the exam arena. Just as Recovery Girl is about to leave, Ida raises his voice. "Is she going to be okay?" he asks, concern lacing his voice. Recovery Girl hesitates, but she answers, "Don't worry, dearie. She'll be all right. Thank you for helping her." Izuku and the other kids trying out for the support department weren't allowed to linger on the school campus after the exams. They weren't permitted to watch the hero course kids take on the practical exam and were sent home. The walk home is sullen, which was strange. Izuku's mind is still taking down notes of his surroundings. It's basically become a muscle memory at this point. Once he gets home, Chizome isn't there, so he waddles over to his room and collapses onto his bed. His face sinks into the comforter, then coats the bed. His hand brings the phone from his pocket to his face. It wasn't even late and he didn't really feel like doing anything anymore. He was a bit hungry, but he was too tired to cook something for himself. Instead, he sits in his bed and scrolls through a few news articles. There's a lot of news about a serial killer that's been on the run. It's not Stain, it's an unknown criminal that's been killing people left and right. They drain their blood. It's a slow and merciless death. It makes Izuku's spine tingle. My. Izuku hums, clicking on another article related to the unknown killer. I really do have to get in touch with Himiko again. He says to no one in particular. There's no one in the room to hear him anyways. There aren't any pictures attached to the articles, but they do describe the same thing. The victims are left to bleed out and die. Majority of the victims are teenage boys, some girls, occasionally a young pro hero. She's really improved. Izuku could probably schedule a play date? Wait, no. He was on UA's records now. If anyone found him running around with a crazed schoolgirl killer, then he'd be done for. They'd track him down and then they'd send a team of heroes to get him from the apartment. He'd have to run away if he didn't want Chizome to get captured, and yeah, he was overthinking things. His body released a lazy yawn and Izuku's eyes fluttered closed for a moment. He placed his phone underneath his pillow and snuggled into the sheets of the bed, falling into a light sleep. The dream he had was strange. There are 3 large figures in front of him. The rest of the world is white and blank. When he looks to the left, he sees Shigaraki and Kurojiri, then he sees Toga. He wants to walk towards them, but something keeps him in place. When he looks to the right, there stands unfamiliar faces. There's a tall, broad-shouldered guy, then a small girl standing next to him, then there's the familiar spiky blonde hair that Izuku's grown to really like. When he turns to the center, There stands Chizome, his back turned towards the boy. There's someone next to him. Izuku vaguely recognizes the pink clumps of her that fall onto her shoulders. He takes a step forward and the floor beneath him cracks, and he's left falling into oblivion. He wakes up. He wakes up at 2 a.m., a little earlier than he usually does when he was still training with All Might. Right, All Might? He feels a bit bad for leaving the pro hero hanging. He wonders whatever's gonna happen to his successor thing. Would All Might try to look for him? They didn't exchange numbers or anything, and All Might never pressed for any private information such as his address and familial matters. Izuku slid out of bed and stood up. The joints in his elbows and shoulders popped as he stretched. The world around him was quiet, almost as quiet as the dream he just had. The world is so effing weird. He remembers bringing home a pack of mochi from a few days ago, and what better time to eat it than at 2 a.m. in the morning, right? Izuku leaves his room and slides over to the kitchen, opening the fridge and swiping up the pack of sweets. He specifically ordered the most popular flavor, which was matcha with red beans inside. It's a little overrated but still good. Izuku drops himself onto the couch, shoving another piece into his mouth. This was peaceful and kinda nice. After a stressful day, he could go for some milk tea too. There was a place nearby that stayed open 24/7. He passes by it every time he would jog to the Dagoba beach. Once he finishes up with his mochi, he tosses the plastic into the trash can and head for the door. A nice walk outside to get some milk tea sounded great. He shoves his feet into his crimson-red shoes and leaves the apartment. The crickets outside were chirping rhythmically, as if they were following a pattern. Izuku paid no mind and trotted down the stairs. The air around him was chilly. He was glad he brought a jacket that he didn't even bother to wear. Izuku wound up at the milk tea store. The glass was nice and clean. The store inside was nicely lit up. There were 2 people sitting inside. One was behind the cashier and the other was a customer, sipping on a straw. He entered through the door. The customer spared him a glance and a smile. She had a nice face, Izuku had to admit, cute and plump. She turned away and continued to scroll through her phone while drinking the tea. He walked up to the counter, his red shoes squeaking against the tiles of the floor. "Hello." The employee greeted with a tired smile. "You sure are up late." Izuku shrugs. "Guess I am. Could I have some black tea? Extra pearls, please." "Sure thing, sir." The guy nods, turning back to get a cup and begin preparing Izuku's drink. That was when it happened. Izuku had that weird instinctual buzzing feeling he gets when something dangerous got too close. He built it up after so many attacks from Chizome. He ducked his head just in time to avoid getting impaled by a sharp needle. It ended up etching itself into the back of the employee's head. "Ooh, I got them in a good spot." When Izuku turns around, there's sludge dripping onto the floor, and standing before him was no longer the cute stranger he saw earlier. Instead, it was his old friend. "Himiko!" Izuku exclaims, incredibly excited to see her here. He quickly takes off his jacket and tosses it towards her so she could cover up her naked body. She gladly accepts it with an adorable squeak. She slides it over her petite body and sniffs it lovingly. "Izuku-kun." Toga cheers, running towards him to embrace him a hug. "I'm so glad you ducked in time. I got a little scared that I'd hit you." She wraps her small arms around his torso and squeezes. "It's been so long. I'd thought you'd gotten rusty." "Me? Getting rusty? Not likely." Izuku responds, accepting the hug. "Not that I'm glad to see you, but what are you doing here?" "Right now? I just wanted to get free drinks." She tilts her straw towards him. Izuku gladly takes a sip and licks his lips after getting a taste. "I'll drain that man's blood in a bit. We've got to catch up." After they separate from the hug, Izuku moves to turn off the lights while Toga pulls down the metal blinds that seals them away from the outside world. They take a seat by the wall. The smell of blood begins to fill the air. "It's been what? For years since we've last seen each other?" Izuku prompts, leaning back and sipping on his drink lazily. Toga nods, waving her small arms around. "It's been too long, Izuku-kun. I really missed you. I couldn't come back to Mustafa just yet, though." Toga pouts, her cute little cheeks going slightly pink. "I've missed you too, but you haven't answered my question." "Oh right," Toga chirps, Jiren called me into the city. Something about a group wanting new recruits or something. The actual mission thing doesn't happen for a few months though, so I've just been running around, killing people. Sounds festive. Izuku chuckles. Toga nods in agreement. What have you been up to? Toga asks, head tilted in interest. Not much. The green-haired boy rolls his shoulders into a casual shrug. I tried out for the UE support department, though. Really? Toga gasps, getting up on her toes and leaning forward on the table. That's so cool. I'm sure you did really great, Izuku-an. I think I did decent. Izuku replies, there's a slightly pleased tone in his voice. An idea pops into his mind, something that Toga might actually find interesting. Actually no. Izuku and Toga would always find ways to entertain themselves no matter what the circumstance. It was a strange but very helpful ability. Oh, by the way, did you hear about the death of Night and Day? Toga visibly perks. There's a shiny glint in her eyes and her lips curl into a Cheshire smile. Oh yes, I heard about it. That was me. Toga stands up from her seat and squeals. She looks like she's about to explode from sheer excitement. She leans over and hugs Izuku again. That's awesome. Did you get some of their blood? What did it look like? Who did you kill first? Did you do that thing? The thing where you say something snarky before killing them? This is one of your first real kills, right? Like, I know you've cut people before but they've never died up until now? What was it like? Some say that people pick up different habits and characteristics from the people they're around. Izuku picked up a mild bloodlust from Toga, while she practically inherited Izuku's mumbling. It was funny. It takes Izuku a few seconds, then he responds, I didn't get any of their blood. It was pretty dark and we kept damage to a minimum. Dawn died first. Yes, I mocked them before they died. Yes, it's one of my first actual kills and it was pretty cool. Toga giggles. Her smile was so wide it looked like her lips were about to rip apart. By the time the sun begins rising, Toga had SCKD out the blood from the dead employee and uses her quirk to morph into them. The duo finds an extra pair of clothes in the back room of the shop. Toga changes clothes and picks up a cap that was hanging on a coat rack. Once they're outside of the shop, Toga suddenly hugs Izuku. It feels a little weird. The form Toga was in was pretty tall. They had stiff and bony arms, unlike those of Toga's real body. Izuku-kun, she whines, and it sounds so out of place with the man's voice. Do you want to meet up again in a few days? Izuku asks, turning to make eye contact. Toga nods furiously. I would love that. Text me when you're free, I'll just be around. She presses a playful kiss to Izuku's freckled cheek and he chuckles. I'll see you later, Izuku-kun. She releases her embrace and runs off in a separate direction. Izuku smiles. Toga is really cool. Izuku loves hanging with her. He wanted to keep their relationship as platonic. Toga liked playing around with guys, and he hoped he wasn't going to be one of her future victims. With a satisfied sigh, Izuku turns around and comes face to face with a familiar skeletal man. All Might. Izuku squeaks, eyes going wide. His mind tells him to run, but he somehow manages to keep his feet planted on the ground. He wasn't going to run away from this problem, he needed to face it head-on. Midoriya. All Might exclaims in surprise, How are you? He cares. A voice in Izuku's mind whispers. He wants to know if you're okay. He's showing concern because he was worried. I'm fine. Izuku responds calmly. Sorry that I disappeared on you. All Might stares at him. Despite his bony facial structure, his expression is soft and understanding. He brings a hand to Izuku's shoulder and squeezes gently. It's okay. Though I am curious as to why. Izuku tries to explain, I decided I didn't want to be a hero anymore. That makes All Might's eyes widen slightly. He taps a finger onto his lower lip for a moment. He was trying to register the information, trying to formulate what he was going to say next. Through Izuku's peripherals, he can see a few civilians are beginning to flow onto the street. He's beginning to tremble. He needs to leave now. A pleasant-looking lady with pale skin and short blue hair walks by them and approaches the milk tea shop. She stares at the locked doors questionably, but then she takes out a pair of keys and unlocks the metal guards. She pulls it open and Izuku winces when she screams. All Might was in the middle of saying something that Izuku wasn't really listening to, but he stops when the lady screams. He morphs into his more muscular form when no one looks and orders Izuku to stay still while he goes inside to check it out. Sheet, this was his chance to run. Hey, it's okay. Izuku could hear All Might trying to calm down the wailing lady. We'll call the police, they'll take care of this. It's okay. He exits the shop, holding onto the lady, who was crying profusely. Izuku feels the slightest bit of pity for her. What happened? Izuku asks innocently. All Might sighs. Somebody was killed. He says bluntly. He was my younger brother. The lady that opened the shop whimpers, rubbing away the tears from her eyes. Hi, his name was Kahaku. He didn't do anything wrong. She leans against All Might and continues crying. Izuku frowns and approaches the lady, gently nudging her arm. She looks up at him with teary eyes. I'm sure he was a great guy. Izuku murmurs and she nods. One of the best. Her voice is racked by a sob. Why him? Why did it have to be him? She continues to cry endlessly and Izuku almost breaks into tears as well. If I could trade my life for his, I would do it in a heartbeat. I'm sorry. Izuku sighs, patting her back comfortably. A few people begin to gather around, and eventually the police arrive at the scene. They begin to assess the situation, while a few others begin to talk to the lady, trying to get her to explain. There wasn't even much to talk about because it wasn't like she was there when her brother died. I'm sorry you had to see this, my boy. All Might says sullenly. He lets out a breath. You should head home, we can talk more on another day. He advises calmly, and Izuku nods. There's something eating him at his chest, and it hurts. It's like a little monster planted itself into his heart and it's ripping his muscles apart. Actually, wait. The pro-hero brings out his phone and hands it to Izuku. If you don't mind. I'd like to exchange numbers, we can communicate more there. Izuku nods. There was no harm in giving All Might his number, right? Wait. Oh my god, All Might just asked him for his number. Under any other circumstance, Izuku would be jumping around in joy, but now wasn't the best time. He inputs his phone number and calls his phone to test if it works. The transaction is confirmed once his phone begins vibrating in his pocket. The green-haired boy hands the phone back to the blonde hero. I hope to talk to you soon, my boy. Right after that, All Might turns away to talk to the group of reporters that arrived a few seconds ago. Izuku is free to go, and he begins his walk home. His mind felt both numb and overwhelmed at the same time. At other times, Izuku would be giggling at the news of a nearby murder, but he just couldn't bring himself to even summon up a small smile. What was happening? 3 days after the incident, Izuku finds himself laying across his bed, lazily swiping through his phone and tossing chips into his mouth. He'd have to burn away the fat later, but he didn't really care at the moment. He was still waiting for the letter from UA to arrive. He was also waiting for Chizome to get back. Where the hell did he even go? Izuku almost jumps when someone begins calling his phone. He tosses aside the bag of chips and picks up. Hello? Izuku Midoriya? That's me. Good morning, my name is Detective Neo Mesa. I'm usually not the one to contact people when it comes to cases, but they assign me to do it anyway. Izuku raises an eyebrow. Okay? What's this about? Right. 3 days ago, you were observed in front of a shop with All Might when the murdered victim was discovered. Yeah, I remember that. Sheet, did they find out? F-. Izuku wasn't even the one that killed the guy. Damn it, Toga. The woman that found the body is named Masami Takahashi. She wants to talk to you. If you wish to fulfill her request, please drop by the police station in the area. She's waiting for you. Why me? She told us you comforted her after she found the body. I think it would really make her feel better if you showed up. Izuku hums, but he already made up his choice. I'll be there in a few minutes. Thank you. When Izuku arrives, the lady from the incident is standing outside with another man. They're peaceful conversing with one another, but the lady is the first to realize Izuku is approaching. She looks really tired. She's wearing a large jacket that covers most of her body. Midoriya? The man asks and Izuku nods. Great, thank you for showing up. I'll leave you two to talk. He walks back into the building and a bunch of people approach him. He's whisked away from the entrance and into another room. Izuku averts his eyes back to the woman in front of him. Hi, she says in a soft voice. Hello. Izuku replies, do you want to sit? There's a bench right over there. Masami bobs her head up and down and follows Izuku to the bench. It's a little cold to the skin but neither of them mind. They sit in silence for a few minutes. There are birds chirping in the air, leaves are rustling as they're swept aside by the wind. Kahaku was just 15. Masami mumbles, keeping her soft tone of voice. He was just helping out at the shop, I knew I shouldn't have left him alone. She curls in on herself and brings her hands up to her eyes. I asked him to watch over while I went out for a break, it's my fault he's gone. Izuku is taken aback by this sudden development. What was he supposed to do? Comfort her? After a few more minutes of soft sobbing, Izuku realizes he is supposed to comfort her. He was the first civilian during the incident to actually comfort her and make sure she's okay. The other people that approached her had jobs that involved comforting other people. Carefully, he pats her back in a there manner. It's not your fault, Mississippi. She doesn't look up, so Izuku continues. There are some pretty crazy people, Izuku says thoughtfully. He thinks of Shigaraki and Chizome when he speaks. I can't say for sure why he was killed, but I'm sure he didn't deserve it. He was just unlucky, and I'm so sorry it happened. I would have helped him out if I was there. There's a bit of silence and Izuku almost thinks he said something foolish, but then the lady looks up and smiles. You're lying, Izuku-an. To Toga? Izuku squeaks. The lady leans forward and presses a finger against Izuku's lips. She lets out a soft shoo, and Izuku actually closes his mouth. Ooh, I couldn't wait to see you again. I'm sorry for surprising you, I just missed you so much. Toga whines, her shoulders swaying in a manner that Izuku did not appreciate. He was pretty sad to know that Toga had tricked him. Since when have you had this form? Just today, don't worry. Miss Masami is fine, she's just asleep in her home. Izuku gasps, did you kill her? I said asleep, didn't I? I just drugged her, I needed to borrow her body so I could visit you. She leans forward and tries to drape her arms on Izuku's shoulders but he pulls away, gripping onto her wrists. I'm not in the mood, Toga. Izuku hisses, pushing her hands away. I can't believe you. What? Toga tilts her head, why? I seriously thought you were somebody else. I can't believe you just took the form of a woman who just lost her brother. She doesn't deserve this. Toga stares at him, her shiny golden eyes narrow on him and she frowns. Fine then. The movement is a little too quick for anyone to catch, but Izuku stops the knife just in time. Toga is still frowning at him. The knife is positioned at his chest. Izuku looks down. Really? She pulls the knife away and tucks it back into her pocket. I don't like this. I don't like this either. Izuku retorts, glaring daggers at his supposed friend. Toga huffs and turns away. Well, whatever. Call me when you stop being such a buzzkill. She glares right back at Izuku, then walks away, leaving Izuku to his thoughts. Things were changing and Izuku didn't know what he was supposed to do. Ochako Uraraka awoke in a hospital room. The room was pleasantly lit. To her right was a large window. She could see a tree on the outside that displayed a nest of baby birds chirping mutely. She tilted her head to look around. The blood returned to her limbs with a tingly, pins and needles feeling. She felt it in her fingers and arms, but not in her legs. Slowly, Uraraka tilts her head down. She wasn't fazed when she finds her legs wrapped in stiff bandages. Her upper body is covered by a white blanket but her bandaged legs are exposed. She blinks twice, and the memory flashes in her eyes. The zero-pointer. The screaming. The pain. It's all so vivid. Though she could barely remember the face of the guy that tried to save her. He had a strong-looking face. She could vaguely recall his voice but she could remember what he said. You're not dead yet. And she still isn't dead. Her legs definitely felt like it. The door in the front of the room opens up and a male nurse steps through. He gives Uraraka a calming smile and walks inside. Hello. My name is Ricky. Do you know where you are? He strides up to her side and takes her wrist, planting 2 fingers at her pulse point as he closes his eyes. In the hospital? That's correct. Ricky says he removes his fingers from her wrist and takes the clipboard attached to Uraraka's bed. He writes down a few things, then looks up. Do you feel okay? How's your head? It's fine. Uraraka murmurs with a slight nod. My legs, she noticed Ricky's shoulders slump. Are they? Please don't take this harshly. Ricky bites down on his lips, lowering down his clipboard to his side. They really tried to help you. They brought in so many health quirk-related users, but even Recovery Girl couldn't. He takes in a deep breath and shuts his eyes, giving her the sullen news. Uraraka stares at him. Her brains takes a moment to register the information. Ricky gives her a sympathetic look. It's close to apologetic. She'll never be able to become a hero. She'll never be able to help her parents. Without realizing it, she feels tears spill out her eyes and her mouth releases a sob. Ricky drops everything he's holding and quickly holds her in his arms. I'm so sorry. After 2 weeks of doing literally nothing, Izuku realized he'd never been so bored. No one has contacted him. All Might didn't send a text, Chizome is still missing, and thank God Toga hasn't approached him again. He wonders if he'll run into Kirishima or that pink-haired girl, Hatsum, was it? The one he had met at the exams. He's met some very interesting people in the past months. He finds it a little ironic. He got the chance to meet so many people aspiring to be heroes, while he was just him. The green-haired boy was in the middle of lifting weights with his eyes were glazed onto the TV in front of him. Nothing particularly interesting was being displayed. Halfway through 50 reps, the door to the apartment swings open. Izuku is right about to greet Chizome, but instead a piece of paper is slammed into his face. God damn it, Izuku. The letter's been stuck under the door for who knows how long. When was the last time you left the house? The first thing Izuku noticed was the smell of blood in the air. And where have you been? You can't just disappear like that. This situation had only happened one other time. It was when he was 8 and Chizome was gone for an entire month. Izuku was stuck with the League during that time. The next thing he noticed was that Chizome managed to smear some of it on the letter. Izuku takes the paper and motions his hand for Chizome to go take a shower or something, to just get out of the room while he opened it. With a chuff, Chizome walked away and towards the bathroom. Izuku stood up quickly and closed the main door since Chizome had lazily left it open. Carefully, Izuku observed the letter with much vigor. He narrowed his eyes at the UA seal, then began peeling it open. Once it was open, a holographic screen appeared and All Might was on it. Izuku Midoriya. All Might boomed in his usual charismatic manner. I am here to deliver the news about your entrance exam. Izuku raised an eyebrow. Why on earth was All Might the one giving him the news? He'd been expecting the school principal, Nedzu, as the one to make the letters for the new students, but no, it was All Might. Now, you may be wondering what I'm doing here on this very screen. Izuku nods. To tell you the truth? I've come to you to become a teacher. All Might exclaims, putting a hand to his forehead and letting out a laugh. On another note, I deeply apologize for being unable to contact you for the past week. I was busy giving the news to the other students that passed the exam. Izuku stares at the screen. All Might clears his throat to reduce the awkward tension. I'm not supposed to be the one to give you the announcement, since you applied for the support department, but Netza gave me some leeway, so here I am. Okay, is all Izuku says. Take a look at this screen. All Might points to his right and a TV screen lights up. It's a video from his testing room, right as the door opens up and releases puffs of smoke. You accidentally released some gas which ended up flooding to another room. That gave you a few deductions, but your idea for the support gear was incredibly excellent. Hatsum Mei wasn't bothered by the explosion anyway, and if you're curious, she passed as well. Well. Oh right. All Might laughs again. Izuku can almost feel the vibrations in his chest. Congratulations, Izuku Midoriya. Welcome to the UA support department. A shine glazed over Izuku's eyes and he jolts up from his seat. He feels warm in his chest. The feeling is becoming more and more often, Izuku notes. A hand appears at the bottom right corner of the screen and waves. All Might glimpses at it and nods. Well, they're telling me to wrap it up. So, young Midoriya, I await to see you in the UA uniform, plus Ultra. All Might cheers and Izuku simultaneously joins along with a raised fist. The video is clipped and the room is silent. He didn't even notice when tears began running out of his eyes. Fantastic. Chizome walks out of the bathroom, dumping his bloodied uniform into the clothes basket stationed outside the shower. He's using a towel to dry up his hair, but once he gets close enough to Izuku he shakes the water off of his hair and it splatters onto Izuku. So, what did it say? Izuku stares at Chizome for a long while. The tears are still flowing out of his eyes. He finally brings up a hand to wipe away the fluid, then he feels a rough palm rest onto his shoulder. Hey, it's okay if you didn't get in. It's their loss. The green-haired boy can only chuckle dryly before responding, I got in. Immediately, Izuku is lifted up from the couch and spun around. Chizome has a very strong body. It felt a little weird to receive a hug from him. Chizome, you're killing me. Help. Oh, sorry. Once Izuku is back onto his feet, he gives the letter to Chizome for safekeeping. We need to celebrate. Holy shit, you got into UA. The same school as All Might. Not exactly? Izuku responds with an unsure tone. He was in heroics? I'm just in support? So there's kind of a big gap. Doesn't fucking matter, Chizome huffs. Okay, here's the plan. You go out and buy both of us some takeout at that one ramen place you really like. Izuku's eyes shine brightly and he smiles. Yes, I get it, you're happy. Put in a lot of garlic for mine. Can do. Izuku salutes and rushes out the door. He has to run back into the apartment though. Chizome tosses him the wallet that he had so foolishly forgotten. With bright green eyes and a heart full of satisfaction, Izuku trots to the ramen place nearby. He orders 2 big bowls for takeout and promptly receives them in plastic bags. Izuku pays the bill and waves a goodbye to the nice lady that runs the shop. While on his way back, Izuku passes by a convenience store and is suddenly in the mood for some extra snacks. He still had some allowance left in his wallet, so he pushes the door open and hears the voice of the employee giving him a polite greeting. He walks around the aisles, trying to find the place where they put up the shrimp chips. Izuku takes a turn to his right and spots a girl. She's sitting in a wheelchair and trying to reach for something at the top shelf. She's so close to grabbing it, but she just wasn't quite there. She has soft-looking brown hair. The back is curved outwards but ends at the back of her neck, and she has 2 long clumps on the sides of her face. Her cheeks are kinda round. They're puffed out in frustration as she tries to grasp the crackers that are inches away from her fingers. Izuku moves forward to assist her, but she ceases her attempts. Curiously, Izuku watches as she places her hand on the arm of her wheelchair. A pink glow appears underneath her finger pads and the chair suddenly begins floating. She quickly snatches the crackers she'd been struggling to reach, then drops it onto her lap. Right after, she presses her fingers together mutters a soft release, and the chair begins a slow descent to the ground. Excuse me? Izuku calls out and the girl jolts slightly. What you did just there, was that your quirk? He asks, stepping closer. She stares at him with huge round eyes and cute brown pupils. Oh yeah. I wasn't planning on using it, but those darn crackers were just so far. She says jokingly, waving the crackers around to punctuate her joke. That's really cool. Izuku compliments. The girl blushes lightly. Could I ask what it's called? Zero gravity. The girl says calmly. It lets me negate the gravity from whatever I touch. Izuku nods thoughtfully. He had originally thought that it was some kind of telekinesis, since the movement of the chair was so controlled, but the gravity thing made sense too. Izuku is a little too into his thoughts, but then he finally looks up to see the girl staring at him. He raises an eyebrow questionably. Yes? Sorry. It's just that. You have freckles. She points at him. He notices the pink pads she has on her fingers. It's a really uncommon genetic trait here in Japan. Do you have a parent from out of the country? Izuku stares at her. He tries to tell her and keep his tone sullen, because it wasn't a good thing to say it, but what he does end up saying is, bold of you to assume I have parents. The silence in the room screams at Izuku's ears. Oh, sorry, I didn't. No, it's fine. Izuku interrupts her by raising up his hands. They passed away after a villain attack. My uncle is taking care of me. He waves his hand around and the girl nods understandably. I don't want to seem like I'm feeling worse than you, but my parents are almost never home. She sighs, shoulders slumping excessively. They're so busy. I hope you get to spend some time with them. Izuku offers a kind smile. If you want to talk more, my name's Uraraka. The girl, Uraraka, Izuku now knows, Uraraka Ochako. Izuku registers the information in his mind, nodding. Izuku Midoriya. The green-haired boy returns, and for a split second Uraraka just stares at him with a confused look in her eyes, but it quickly vanishes. His mind still hangs on the expression she gave him. It was as if she'd heard the name before. Well, I'm glad to meet you, Midoriya. Uraraka begins to roll away to pay for the crackers, but she accidentally activates her quirk and the chair begins floating. Izuku jumps forward and grabs the wheels of the chair to pull it back down to the ground. Once it's secured onto the tile floor, Uraraka returns the gravity to the chair and she chuckles softly. Whoops, she chuckles softly, my fingers slip sometimes. She scratches at the back of her head, her lips curved into a small smile. It's all right. Izuku shrugs. As an act of friendship, he allows himself to push her wheelchair to the cash register. On his way, he swiftly snatches a bag of shrimp chips and hears Uraraka giggle. They pay for their food and Izuku gladly helps Uraraka get out of the store. Do you want to exchange numbers? Uraraka suddenly asks. She's already taking out her phone. She clicks it a few times and shows off a set of numbers to Izuku. Here, this is mine. We should totally talk more. Izuku makes small head movements that are supposed to resemble a nod. He removes his phone from his pocket and takes note of the number. Once it's registered, he rings her up. Another giggle escapes from Uraraka and she picks up. Hello? Who is this? She says jokingly, her shoulders are bouncing from her laughter. Izuku grins, he covers his mouth and brings his voice an octave lower. Ooh. Izuku mutters into his phone and Uraraka absolutely loses it. She's clutching her stomach and laughing. Izuku can't help but join along. Okay, yep. That settles it. Uraraka wheezes out once she's finished laughing. We have got to talk more one day. You're hilarious. Thank you. Izuku tilts his head forward and she snorts. Afterwards, they exchange farewells and Uraraka begins rolling away, even after Izuku offered to at least bring her to the train station. He realizes that he never got the chance to ask her about what happened to her legs. It was probably personal anyway, but he could imagine how gruesome it would have been. He's still walking back home, down an alleyway that's pretty active with side stores early on in the night. Most of them have closed at that point though. Izuku is about to exit out the narrow hallway, when a hand shoves him to the side and he falls over an esiki into a portal. Or a warp gate, to be precise. There's our MVP. Shigaraki exclaims. He actually sets down his PS4 controller and faces Izuku straight on. Congratulations, you just got into the biggest FING joke of a school in the entire world. His voice is angry, he cracks the knuckles he has on his right hand. Oh huff. Izuku hisses, he glances at Kurogiri simply minding his own business. The warp gate user turns to him and nods slightly, then he turns away to deal with other things. Could I not have one night to myself? My ramen's gonna get cold. He raises up the plastic bag with the food in it. We can heat that up for you anyway, stop being such a brat. You're a brat. Shigaraki growls, getting off from his bar stool. Sensei wants to talk. The older teen had this tone in his voice, it's serious and demanding. Sensei wanted to talk? Well, he can go F himself then. Izuku wanted to go home and eat his food with his dad, maybe he could even text Uraraka or something. Anything would be better than standing here. Wipe that look off your face. We haven't seen each other in months and you're so grumpy about our reunion. Shigaraki grunts, crossing his arms over one another. His long legs take a step forward and Izuku is tempted to throw the bowls of ramen at him. You're so dense, loosen up, Zuku. Izuku's so focused on watching Shigaraki's legs to see if he'll move that he doesn't notice that the other teen has a hand behind his back. Once he realizes it, the warp gate behind his own back has vanished and Shigaraki has Izuku's phone in his hands. He's swiping through it casually, looking through text messages and such. "Ooh, who's this?" Shigaraki chirps. "Have we met before?" He reads one of the messages aloud. It's a message that Izuku didn't see earlier. "I could have sworn I heard your name before? Or maybe it's just common. What the hell is this? Midoriya, who the F is this? None of your business, you chapped but motherfucker." Izuku yells, lunging forward and reaching for his phone. "Give it back." "Short." Shigaraki tuts, shaking his head and raising up the phone. Izuku's still trying to reach for it, but he's a little too short to match up with Shigaraki's height. His attempts are pulled to a stop with Shigaraki grips onto the phone with all 5 fingers. There's a faint crack and Izuku's mind flips. He launches his fist into Shigaraki's stomach. The phone falls out of his hand, the sides are slightly cracked and rusted, but when Izuku catches it, it's still functional. "Damn it. I can't believe I tolerated you before, you're such an a-hole." After months of not talking, of course their already rift bond would be tattered. Bent and broken in different ways, it was only natural. It was probably good too, because Shigaraki didn't know what kind of hell Izuku was put through during those months. He wasn't ready for such a strong punch. Shigaraki almost falls over, but he stays on his feet, hands gripping onto the cloth that covered his stomach. "When the hell did you get it? Power up? That's none of your business too." He shoves the phone into his pocket. "Kurogiri, take me home." Izuku yells, stomping his feet like a whiny brat. He's still stomping when a black void swallows him whole and he's suddenly not stomping on wood, but on concrete. He looks up and faces All for One. "Hello. I apologize for the intrusion." All for One interrupts him. "I really just wanted to congratulate you. Getting into UA is quite the achievement. Even if it's not heroics, their support department is highly praised as well." Thank you." Izuku dares to take a step forward. If that's all, I'd really like to go home. Chizome is waiting. I need your answer." All for One says, voice completely void of any emotion, "I've given you almost a whole year to think about it." Izuku's clutching the plastic bag. There are people waiting for him. Uraraka is waiting for him to text. Kirishima is waiting to see him in UA. Chizome is waiting at home for his ramen. And he's going to FING get it. I'm gonna have to say no. Izuku responds with a sigh. "It was a tempting offer, but no, I'm not going to inherit your quirk." The silence stays there for a good 30 seconds. "All right, I respect your decision." He waves his hand around and the black blob of nothingness begins to form around Izuku's forearm. "Please tell Stain I said hi, and enjoy your dinner." The darkness engulfs him and once he's through, he's back inside his apartment and Chizome is staring at him. "Izuku, what the F dash dot? Talk later, dinner now. Food's getting cold." Izuku hands him the plastic bag. Chizome, despite being very concerned, knew there was no point in trying to get Izuku to talk if he was hungry and there was food in the room. "Alright, that's it. I'm going to slaughter the entire League of Villains." Chizome grits his teeth, slamming his fist onto the table, chopsticks still secured into his hands. He was fuming, he looked about ready. Oh, there goes the chopsticks. Izuku picks up the upper half that had snapped off from Chizome's utensil, setting it aside. "I actually think this means that they're gonna leave us alone now." Izuku shrugged, taking another noodle from his bowl. "I mean, all they wanted was me. Now that I'm gone, they might just, I don't know, leave? They aren't like that." Chizome hisses. "You've been with them for your entire life. You should know this sheet." Izuku gives another shrug. "In all seriousness though, I'm going to be spending my time in UA for the next 3 years. If that place won't protect me, then I might as well just stand in the middle of the street with a sign that says, Bioshock FSC." Izuku picks up a thin piece of meat from the broth, soaking it up before dropping it into his mouth. Chizome is looking at him quizzically, a single eyebrow raised. "Shigaraki really likes Bioshock. I once said it wasn't my favorite game and he threatened to slap me." Ah. The conversation drifts off from there. It seems Chizome trusts Izuku's judgment for his own safety. Unlike before, when the man would literally strap Izuku to his chest everywhere he went, Unless he was off killing. Stop staring at your food, please. It's getting really creepy. Chizome suddenly says, and Izuku is snapped out of the trance he didn't even know he was in. He looks up and sees Chizome looking at him with furrowed eyebrows. I'm getting worried for you. Worried? That's surprising. Izuku snarks. I'm not kidding. Chizome continues on. I wanted to keep you out of the sheet I deal with, but you keep slithering your way into my mess. I can't get you out, so I'm forced to bring you along. He sighs, grumbling against his wrist. Listen, okay, I know you're just a kid, and I didn't want you to involve yourself this early, but then the League wanted to get to you, so I had to grab you first. Okay, now you're scaring me. Izuku replies, he's already put down his utensils. Chizome, is something wrong? Chizome averts his eyes, and that just makes Izuku worry even more. Chizome, tell me what's wrong. Izuku repeats, a bit more stern this time. God, he hated seeing his father like this. He looks worried and scared, and something in Izuku begins to stir. It feels like hot, boiling rage. Towards what? He doesn't know. Chizome. Okay, alright, just. Chizome moves, his knees almost knocking over the table they're sitting at. Your dad. He was the original judge, right? Yeah. He died doing that job. The man grits his teeth, regret swims around in his eyes. I don't want you to die. I don't want to put you at risk. He sounds like he's about to cry, and everything about that is so wrong. I'm not my dad. Izuku interrupts, Chizome, I'm going to be okay. You can't decide that. Chizome protests, his voice gravely. If Yorba really wants to keep me alive, then do it. Izuku yells, the little bubble of rage in his chest begins to leak. I know you're not going to let me die, you told me that so many years ago. So just keep your promise. Chizome stares at him, obviously still confused. I don't know what I'm saying either. Izuku admits, covering his eyes with the palm of his right hand. Man, this Essex. He hears the chair squeaking across the floor. He opens his eyes to see Chizome's arms wrapped around him. No, I got it. Chizome says, I'm going to protect you with my life. He declares, but it's almost a mumble. Because I wasn't able to protect your father. He doesn't include. By the end, Chizome doesn't finish his food and Izuku ends up eating it himself. The boy retreats to his room to get some sleep. Tomorrow was his first day at UA after all. A portal swishes up open in the middle of the living room. Chizome sends one last glance to the door that leads to Izuku's room, then steps through to meet with the League. Once he's through, he spots Shigaraki glaring at him. It's harsh and full of poison. The teenager even hisses out a sigh to compliment his eyes. I never liked you, you know. I didn't either, brat. Chizome retorts, then turns away to face Kurogiri. At least the warp user was so much more reasonable than Shigaraki ever will be. You know what I'm here for. Of course. Kurogiri hums. A miniature warp gate opens up, a small vial and a syringe drops out and into Chizome's hand. He expects it carefully, watching for any possible traps. For all he knows, this thing is laced with poison, and once he uses it on Izuku he's going to die. Shigaraki is still glaring at him, chapped lips turned into a frown, occasionally opening and closing in a profane mutter. Sensei promised that if you give us some of young Midoriya's blood, he will be safe from any of our members. Kurogiri's gaseous form flickers slightly, that includes our upcoming project. Chizome wasn't entirely informed of what this project was, but from what he's heard, it's something dangerous, and there was no way in hell he was going to put Izuku in the line of fire while the boy barely had any experience. It took Hisashi almost 6 years to learn how to defend himself. Without another word, Kurogiri sends him back through another warp gate that leads him directly into Midoriya's room. He contemplates on waking the boy, gently feeling a wave of déjà vu brush over him. He bends down onto one knee and brushes off the blanket that Izuku was using to cover himself. Kid. Chizome calls in a hushed tone, getting a groan as a response. He places a hand onto Izuku's forearm. The boy jolts awake, and before he even realizes it, Chizome feels pain all over his face. Hey! Oh! Sheet! Izuku gasps, reaching for the lamp on his nightstand and suching it on. Sorry. I don't know what came over me, I just did what first appeared to me and… Yo. Shut up, it's fine. Chizome interrupts. At least I know your reflexes work even if you're asleep. What time is it? Izuku groans, squinting his eyes to try and see the clock on the far side of his room. It's really dark, his lamp doesn't provide enough light for him to see the hands. It's early. Chizome informs, but I need something. What? Blood. Chizome says, showing off the syringe he had been keeping under the bed. Izuku stares at him, then the syringe, then back to Chizome. Is this gonna be like last time? By last time, he was referring to the exercise where Chizome used his quirk to paralyze Izuku. The point of the exercise was to see if Izuku could break out of the paralysis quicker than most people. It was a bonus that his was a blood type B, giving him around 2 minutes before it wore off. If he tried really hard though, he could be free 15 seconds early. No, Chizome answers honestly, I need it for something else. Izuku shuffled a little under his blanket, exposing his arm. Chizome locates the area with an easily accessible vein, moving his hand to hold Izuku steady. Slowly, he sticks in the needle. Izuku does not react. Once he's got enough blood, Chizome removes the needle and holds onto the area for a few more seconds. That's it. You can go back to sleep. All Chizome got in return was a soft, as Izuku buried his face into his pillow. When the man turns around, there's a small warp gate open behind him. Hesitantly, Chizome deposits the blood through the void. A note comes out, written on it in messy, black ink were the words, "Thanks. You're safe for now." With a chuff, Chizome rips the note in half and crumples up the paper, shoving it into his pocket and leaving the room. Chizome. What? The next week consisted of Izuku frantically preparing everything he needed for the first day of school. He dragged Chizome literally everywhere. Of course he had to wear a huge jacket, fix up his hair and try to hide his face as much as possible to toss away suspicion, but since Izuku was acting like a little kid everywhere they went, Chizome basically just looked like a really tried dad. Come to think of it, he basically was that. Finally, Izuku had gotten everything ready. He had like 3 bags by the time he arranged everything for the morning of the first day. Have you seen my knives? I'm not letting you bring your knives to you, dummy. Chizome rolled his eyes, sipping from his black coffee. But… no. Izuku puffed out his cheeks, gripping onto the straps attached to his body. He had a backpack for most of his stuff. It was a little empty because it usually had his knives in there, but now it only had a few notebooks and a ton of pens. He had a handbag that was filled with scratch papers and his quirk analysis notebooks, and finally he had a secondary, bigger backpack filled with miscellaneous gear. Chizome tried to convince him that UA would most likely provide all of the equipment, but in Izuku's words, it's better to be prepared. Izuku shoved on his red shoes and tapped them onto the floor to secure the fit. I'll be going then. Have fun. Chizome lazily waves his hand, listening to the creaking of the door as it opened and closed. To say Izuku was excited was an understatement. He felt like he was about to self-combust. And he wasn't doing a very good job at being subtle, because he could see the strange looks from other students on the pathway to the entrance. He wasn't exactly looking where he was going, but he was pretty sure he was on a clear path. There weren't any people in front of him, so he deemed it safe when he spun around when he heard someone call his name. Well, not exactly his name, but he knew it was directed towards him. Hey, Freckles! Rushing from behind, Izuku spotted Hatsum running up to him. She had a large bag trailing behind her, and a small robot carrying more stuff, trying to keep up with her. Izuku lit up, excited to see someone running towards him. He had to admit, it was a little dumb to continue walking without watching where he was going. But in his defense, the other person came out of nowhere. He had his back faced towards the entrance, then bumped into someone. He spins around in alarm, coming face to face with a large, broad body. Looking up, Izuku saw the face attached to it. He was plain-looking with bright blue eyes and a smile on his lips. His blonde hair whipped into a cowlick made him look strangely like All Might. Not only that, but the guy was dressed in a hero costume. Majority of it was white, but it had neon turquoise lines tracing around certain areas, and a large golden 1 billion on the front. "Oh, sorry about that." The man, or student, exclaims in surprise, "I didn't see you there." "I didn't see you either." Izuku tried to quirk a smile. Yeah. The guy chants, "Didn't realize I'd get so far from the starting point." He says, laughing slightly, but his words made no sense to Izuku. "Huh. Before I say anything, I should probably just introduce myself." The student clears his throat, sticking out a hand. "My name is Toga Mirio, a third-year student of the heroics department." Oh, Izuku exclaims. "Wait, what are you doing then?" "It's a new year." Mirio makes a large motion. "Even with my provisional license, I can't exactly practice my quirk out of supervised activities." He then points to the giant building. "Here at UA, students are allowed to use their quirks as much as possible as long as they don't cause too much ruckus." "You're definitely making a ruckus right now though," somebody says softly. Izuku turns around to see another teenager walking by. Mirio yells, really loudly, then lunges forward and tackles the other teen. "Tamaki!" A rustling in the bushes brings Izuku's attention somewhere else. A third student, with light blue hair, emerges from the bushes. "There you two are." She gasps, running to join the hug. "I missed you guys." By the time they're done hugging, Hatsum is standing next to Izuku. "Sorry," Mirio says, directing his words towards Izuku. "I owe you a properly explanation for my quirk. But for now, we should get to class, yeah?" Yeah. "All right then." Mirio bends forward, then bolts off to the entrance. Plus Ultra, first years. "I have no idea what that was, but I like him," Hatsum exclaims, turning to Izuku. "He has a fiery passion. He'd be a good hero." "Right." Izuku agrees with a nod. "Hey, so what class are you?" "Don't worry, Freckles." Hatsum slaps him on the back. "I already checked it, we're classmates." "Oh nice." From what Izuku's heard, the hero course has been having the time of their lives. They get to practice their quirks often and push them to their full capabilities. Izuku wasn't complaining though, he was having plenty fun with Freckles. "Toss me that wrench." Hatsum was a loud one, that was sure, but she was exciting, very lively. A little obnoxious, but tolerable. Izuku enjoyed her company. As instructed, Izuku slides over the wrench that was sitting next to him. He ducks a second later to avoid getting hit in the face by a stray piece of flying metal that had suddenly been tossed across the room. Within 3 days, Hatsum and Izuku had filled their workspaces with clutter and inventions. Izuku had a good amount of sleep within that time, but Hatsum, on the other. "Remind me again how much sleep you've gotten?" Izuku asks, slightly amused. 2 liters. Hatsum replies. Izuku snorts. "That doesn't even make sense." "I know." They continue on like that, exchanging jokes while working together on multiple projects. The only time they stop is when they're forced out of the workshops by Power Loader during break times. They should be allowed to stay in their stations, but their teacher is having none of that. "Okay, I suggest we get ourselves energy bars," Izuku says, while they're lined up in the cafeteria. "And coffee," Hatsum adds with a hum, "so we can at least say we had something to eat if Power Loader ever asks." Izuku nods. They're halfway through the line when somebody taps onto Izuku's shoulder. He turns around and sees Uraraka and Kirishima standing behind him. They both look very happy, and Izuku can't help but smile. "Oh!" Izuku gasps, "Hello." Uraraka moves forward and wraps Izuku in a hug, catching him off guard. He almost shoves her off immediately, preferring not to engage into physical contact so quickly, but he resists and lets the hug happen. "It's been so long. So glad to see you made it into UA," Kirishima says, smiling brightly. "It's genuine, even if the sharp teeth are a little intimidating." Uraraka pulls back, her smile almost reaches her ears. "It was so funny. Because we were all just sharing stories during one of our recent exercises." Uraraka begins, stretching her hands out expressively, "and Kirishima and I share our stories and we notice that there's a very similar factor in both stories." and we eventually came to the conclusion that we had both met you at some point. And that's why we're here. Kirishima continues, shooting an arm in the air. Do you want to eat with us? Maybe we could get you acquainted with our classmates. You are very inspirational. You could get everyone really pumped up. For what? If I may ask. Izuku smiles politely. We've got an important thing tomorrow. Uraraka explains, we're going to one of the facilities in the campus. For some kind of rescue training. That sounds fun. Izuku comments, genuinely interested. Rescue heroes were bravely disregarded by the youth of the modern times. Kids like to focus on the heroes that beat up bad guys. Nobody wants to watch people dig around disaster areas with a 50% chance of them just finding a dead body. Then we'll be sure to tell you about it. Hey! Hatsum slides an arm against Izuku. What were you guys talking about? I got distracted. Another thing Izuku forgot to mention about Hatsum. He wasn't sure or anything, but he's pretty darn sure that Hatsum's got ADHD. Not that it's a bad thing. It does make her a little hard to keep up with, but it's exhilarating. It doesn't disrupt any of her project construction, but that's why she's always switching between things. She just can't stay focused on one project at a time. Oh, hello. Uraraka waves, displaying the pads on her fingers. We were just talking about an upcoming exercise the hero course is having. Do you want to know about it? Hatsum doesn't respond right away. Izuku looks back to her, noticing how she's using her quirk to zero in on Uraraka's hands. She suddenly reaches forward and grasps it, examining them carefully. Uraraka gasps, shocked and very much confused. Her expression makes Izuku snicker. You're zero gravity, aren't you? She says, holding up Uraraka's hands to her face. I read about you and your costume. Very clever, I must say. Having certain parts of your costume where they would press down on pressure points to subdue nausea is something I could have thought of. Uraraka gapes, her cheeks suddenly even redder than they are usually. What? How did you know? We got unlimited access to Power Loader's files. Izuku winks, hinting that they aren't supposed to have that kind of access. Every hero costume order gets processed through him, so we get to see it all. Ooh. Kirishima says in awe, a sparkly glint in his eyes. Then what about my costume? Could I improve it? I'd recommend self-repairing fabric. Hatsum exclaims, thought there isn't any fabric that can fix itself right away. I'm actually working on something. She spins to Izuku, do you have the sample? Hell yeah I do. Izuku reaches into the pocket of his little pouch that hung around his hip. He brings out a black fabric that's not larger than his palm and holds it out. Try cutting it. Kirishima does as instructed, hardening his hand and cutting a jagged line across the fabric. They all stare at it for a whole 5 seconds before it starts bringing itself together, pieces of the materials finding the other half and tying themselves together. Whoa! Uraraka presses her hands to her face, making an outrageously surprised expression. That's incredible. I know. Hatsum says smugly. Then she turns her head the other way. Hey, Freckles. Let's go get our food. I gotta finish the prototype for Endeavor's kid before it overheats and blows up. She loops her arm around Izuku's and starts dragging him off. I'll text you guys. Izuku falls out, earning a thumbs up from the 2 other students. What the F dash dot? Izuku spins his head around, finding Chizome standing at the door. The man is, once again, dressed in his hero killer getup. There isn't much of a trace of blood on him, and Izuku can't really smell anything. Unless he's gone past the point where he's completely immune to the smell of blood of the hundreds of thousands of times Chizomes come him covered in blood. Evening. What the F dash dot? Chizome says again. Because who wouldn't be surprised to find the little rascal on the floor of the apartment's living room? There's several packs of chips scattered around, and also several tools. Leaning against the couch was this giant grenade-looking gauntlet. But at that moment he was working on another thing, one hand holding a glove and another tweaking around with a screwdriver. Sorry for the mess, I thought you weren't gonna be home until later. Izuku says, though his casual tone does not match how he frustratedly throws the screwdriver across the room then bites the glove angrily. Chizome takes off the dirty bandana that does its job of covering his eyes and the sad empty part of his face that used to be his nose. He proceeds to take off the rest of his uniform, crumpling it up into a ball. It seems he isn't gonna bother going out on patrol for a while. Izuku doesn't mind when Chizome walks around the apartment shirtless. He's got scars all over, it's a little scary, nothing compared to the little splotch of burned skin on his chest. Especially not now when he's so gosh darn close to finishing this. Chizome comes back, ironically wearing a worn-out All Might-themed shirt. He nudged the gauntlets by the couch curiously. What are these? Gauntlets. Yes, I can see that, but for what? Bakugo. Izuku replies, specifically. It's kind of like a storage unit for his sweat so he can create some large-scale explosions, but the original design is kind of funky so I'm fixing it. Where'd you get the school? Technically I shouldn't be allowed to bring this stuff home but I did it anyway. Izuku chirps, setting the glove aside and reaching sidewards to grab the gauntlet. I shouldn't be condoning this. Chizome mutters, rubbing his temple. Never asked for your permission. That gets a smirk out of Chizome. Dimmin. You're getting cheeky, kid. Got it from somebody else. Oh. Chizome moves to sit on the couch, then turns onto his side. To lay down. Her name's Hatsum. She's super wild. Izuku traces the outer shell of the gauntlet, searching for something. He feels for a panel, then lifts it upwards. He grabs a small tool that Chizome can't even name, but he watches Izuku as he looks into the little panel and ticks at certain wires. And I'm pretty sure she's gonna end up blowing up UA before a villain does. That's cool. Chizome sighs, looking away and covering his face with the cushion. I'm gonna go sleep now. Don't forget to clean up. Gotcha. Slowly now, Freckles. Hatsum yells. Izuku's half convinced that she's actually going deaf and she's dragging him down with her. Hold it. Izuku freezes, locking his limbs in place. He's holding onto a block of metal that's glowing a glaring orange. It's no bigger than his hand as well. Hatsum runs off, then returns with a lighter. Alright. 1, 2, 3. She lights a fire underneath the metal block and it melts completely. It drips onto the floor like some kind of monstrous blob. It consumes the lighter and almost gets Hatsum's hand, but she managed to snatch it away at the right time. The metal hardens within seconds, and it's incredibly shiny. Izuku is absolutely blown away. He didn't expect it to work, but it did. And it was so appealing. Could you believe it? In a span of roughly 37 hours, Hatsum Fang May developed a metal that would melt into large amount when exposed to a flame. It's supposed to be a capture weapon for Endeavor's kid. It's quite clever, Izuku thinks. A metal that overflows when exposed to fire, and its hardened state can only be broken when it's frozen. Perfect for that Todoroki kid. That's our child. Hatsum proclaims, rubbing her finger against the hardened metal. Yes, it is. Izuku agrees, feeling very proud. In the back of his pocket, his phone vibrates. Hey, I'm gonna take 5. He brings out his phone and waves his hand. Fine, but I'll look at your test run for the grenade gauntlets. Fair enough. Izuku plops himself on one of the swivel chairs in the room. It was Izuku's idea to have at least 7 swivel chairs in the room, and Hatsum scattered a bunch of beanbags, so there's that too. He taps onto his messaging app, looking through the recent contacts. The first one he checks is from Kirishima. Kirishima. Hey! So we're getting on a bus RN 857. Everyone's talking so much, it's kinda overwhelming. 902. Okay, we're almost there. I might need to put my phone away. 910. I'll take pics if you want. 910. 00 We should totally make a group chat with Uraraka. 911. The messages cut off after that. Izuku moves to the next contact. Uraraka. Hello Izuku. 7:30. How are you? You didn't message either of us last night. 7:30. But I was just thinking you were busy so it's fine. 7:30. I didn't see you eat much yesterday. 7:46. So I hope you got a proper meal when you got home. 7:46. My class is getting on a bus RN 858. While one of the guys is getting all riled up. 903. Bakugo was his name? Maybe you know him? 903. I wouldn't be surprised, huh? You somehow just wriggle yourself into people's lives. 904. Okay. We just arrived at the training area. I'll text you later. 911. He sees one more contact with an unread message. Bloody boy. Kid 903. Don't do anything dumb. 905. Something's happening right now. Don't try to intervene. 905. I don't want you getting hurt. 906. Those heroics kids will be fine. 907. Izuku feels ice go through his veins. It's so sudden. And he was even in a good mood. What could be happening? He left Chizome on scene and went to another contact that was not there a few seconds ago. When he reads the message, he swears this number should be blocked. No. Hey shorty 910. You should head to the USCH 910. We're hanging around with the heroics brats. 910. Come on, it'll be fun. 910. I don't usually like sharing my EXP, but you can be an exception. 911. We're starting. 920. That last message ruins everything for Izuku. He closes his phone and faces the screen downwards. Should he do something? He should do something. What if they don't believe him? What if they figure out who Chizome is? Izuku needs to delete this number. He needs to delete it. He deleted it. He swore he deleted it. No. Wow, okay, rude. 932. Ha, watch. 932. Unknown sent a video. 932. It's like the video plays on its own. It's a video taken from an awkward angle, but Izuku can clearly see someone get their arm twisted and busted up by this thing. It's a good thing he doesn't have his volume up, because just by watching the video, he can already hear the sickening crack and the splatter of blood. Freckles, what's wrong? Hatsume's suddenly behind him, holding up the gauntlet. You look like you saw a ghost. Izuku instinctually slams the phone back onto the table. Nothing. It was. Izuku's breath catches in his throat, but he manages to finish, nothing. Because Izuku didn't alert the teacher sooner. A student from the hero course died at the hands of the League of Villains. And everyone else was left with scars. Both psychological and physical. The student that died was a stranger to Izuku. He learned his name after watching a press conference on TV later that night. His name was Kaminari Denki. The only other people with him were Yaoyorozu Momo and Kyokajiru, and both of them saw how a villain got their hands on Kaminari, crushing his neck with his bare hands. The villain was captured. It was shown on the list of villains captured after the incident. 70 villains. Where the F did Shigaraki get so many people? Izuku hopes they all die. It'd make things less hard. Sleepoo. Hey Freckles, are you alright? They aren't gonna let us go to school for a while. They don't think it's safe. I kinda think it's bullshit. Freckles, I know you're seeing these. A mad Hatsume. At me? At the villains. Think we all are. Don't guilt trip yourself over it or essence. We couldn't have done anything. Izuku clenches the phone in his hand. He could have done something. He could have told the teachers. But Izuku isn't going to beat himself up over this. Because Shigaraki did this, not him. And he's going to pay. Sorry, Chizome, but just this once. Izuku is going to walk straight through that godforsaken door and beat the shit out of Shigaraki with his own god DMN PS4 controllers. Izuku snuck out late that night, running at the top of the buildings like the first time he was properly brought on a mission with Chizome. He was still a ways from the base, so he used his travel time to think of what he was gonna say. First, he's gonna beat Shigaraki with his shoe, then maybe stab him and laugh at his pain. Izuku bit his lip to hide his grin. The little mask did that for him, though. He leapt down from a short rooftop he had been crossing, carefully letting himself drop on top of a large garbage compartment in an alley. He instinctively looked sideways to check for anything, and managed to spot something moving further down the alley. He's still got time, Izuku decides. Time to see what lame-ass D-listers are roaming the streets tonight. He doesn't even have to check for his knives, he's sure they're there. Izuku got a little closer, squinting his eyes in an attempt to see better in the darkness. Once he got close enough, he first spotted a small group of people pressed up against the wall, eyes screwed shut while they tried to avoid the fight going on in front of them. There was a guy that was all gray, probably a mutation quirk, he throwing his fists around blindly. Izuku scoffs at. How foolish he looks. His opponent is quick, Izuku can barely see him. He only sees him when he lands a hit. He doesn't look like a hero, but he wears the colors of All Might. Izuku definitely recognizes that limited edition All Might hoodie. You shouldn't be messing around with high schoolers. The man dressed in color says, "They're just kids, you muggers should really learn some manners." Izuku blinks once, and the man kicks the villain in the face, effectively knocking him out. That guy's is fast. The man turns around, half his face is covered by a mask similar to his own. There are goggles sitting on his head, like they're just there for fashion. He blinks, then he jumps away. He literally takes on leap to attach himself to the wall, and starts moving vertically until he's out of sight. Seeing no point in chasing the mysterious figure down, he looks to the high schoolers. Seeing that they didn't need any more help, he left to return to his own mission. He runs out of the alley and follows the path he believes will lead him to the league. And he's right, because within seconds he's standing in front of the alleyway that contained the door of their sorry excuse of a base. He takes in a breath, then pushes the door open. "All right, Shigaraki. This can only go one way, and it's gonna be me beating your chapped butt face with my shoe. Oh, what the F dashed." The boy sitting in front of him isn't Shigaraki. He's casually playing Super Smash Ultimate on a Nintendo Switch that's hooked to the same TV that usually has Shigaraki's PS4. One more. The guy who's wrecking the goddamn match while playing as Kirby is supposed to be dead. The golden-haired teen shushes him, eyes too focused on the screen. Izuku watches as he grabs a hold of his opponent, smashing the larger character into the ground, then launching him to his death with a hammer. The victory screen plays and he sets down his controller. "Hi. You're Midoriya, right?" He smiles, raising a hand out for a handshake. "My name's Kaminari. You might recognize me from the USJ? You're supposed to be dead," Izuku says bluntly. Kaminari laughs. "Oh, I was." That catches Izuku totally off guard. What the hell does he mean? He's pretty damn sure that All for One didn't have a quirk that could revive dead people. "You heard that my neck got crushed, right?" Kaminari says, even going as far to display his neck. There's no sign of even the slightest bit of damage. That's what everyone believes, but people never think twice about how reliable a pair of terrified high schoolers can be. Kaminari gets up from his seat, grinning wickedly. "Do you want to know what really happened?" Izuku frowns. "Tell me." "When the villain put his hands around my neck, he actually sent a wave of electricity through me. He just needed a pulse point to electrocute my heart. He stopped it from beating," he explains, running a hand through his hair. "Kurogiri got me back just in time though. When they retrieved me, All for One used a quirk that forcefully activated my quirk. It shocked me back to life." He shivered, rubbing his biceps in a jittery motion. "Why?" Izuku finds himself asking, but never once letting his guard down. "Why what, Midoriya?" Kaminari lets his head droop to the right. "Why am I here? Why am I still alive? Why was I in you?" He presses his hand to his cheek. "So many questions. So little time. I'm surprised you don't know." Izuku slides his hand down his, simply taking precaution, but allowing Kaminari to keep talking. "I was a spy since the beginning. Being dumb was just an act. The only reason the League killed me was so that I could get off the hook without being tracked," he explains. "I mean, they don't need me if they've got you." "What?" Kaminari stares at him, not expecting that answer. "Shigaraki said you're a spy for them too, and you've been with them longer, so they decided to leave things to you." He taps a finger against the wooden table next to him. "That's the situation, isn't it?" "I wouldn't say that." Izuku hisses, deciding what he's going to do. "I'm just gonna go. Tell Shigaraki this. Go to hell." Sure. Kaminari waves a hand. "I'll even make sure to say it with that face." He salutes, allowing Izuku to walk out the door. Well, this night has proven to be something to think about. First, he runs into some mysterious hero wannabe that doesn't even seem half bad. Then he finds out that the hero core student that everyone's been mourning about is actually alive and a spy for the League of Losers. Izuku wishes he could just sleep on this. Chizome isn't there when he gets home. Probably. Izuku isn't sure. That man sleeps like the dead and he's really quiet about it too, and his door is always closed. Izuku can never tell if he's in there. Izuku trudges over to his room, still mad at himself for that failure of an attack. He drops onto the bed and brings out his phone, almost like a normal teenager. He notices that there's a line of message from Hatsum. Sleepu. Hey, why are you outside? I'm tracking your phone LMAO. Go back to your house you ho. Slate. Where are you going? Freckles. DMN you blocking my signal? That's good. Come back. Freckles. Izuku hums, impressed that Hatsum was actually tracking him. She must have snagged his phone during one of his energy naps. He leaves her on read, though, honestly not in the mood to reply. First order of business the next day was to wake up at 3 a.m. and do some research. There were still some news articles floating around about Kaminari Denki's death, and Izuku hated reading through them. He goes on to one of the public forums where people can talk about new heroes that may have broken into the pro-hero world without the media catching on about it. At Small Might 606, hey, has anyone seen a kinda tall and slim guy that runs around wearing an All Might hoodie? I think he has some kind of mobility quirk. Funny enough, somebody replies almost immediately. At All Mighter One, that's one of Narahata's local vigilantes. He's the Crawler. At Small Might 606, never heard of him. But I travel a lot anyways. Do you know when he's out most often? At All Mighter One, I see him during the night most often, but you might catch him during the day if there's an incident. At All Mighter One, you're not like a police officer, are you? At Small Might 606, nah, just a guy. That's all the information he needs for now. Time for school. Seeing Class 1A during lunch break that day felt horrible. They all looked so gloomy, especially that black-haired guy with the elbows. Some of them tried to smile and start up conversations, but the others just didn't seem to be in the mood. Hey, could I do something real quick? Hatsum nods, her mouth too filled up with a fruit-based energy bar, one of the rare healthy things that Hatsum has consumed. Izuku leaves his tray on the table he was sitting at with his classmate and goes over to where Kirishima and Uraraka are sitting. Hey. Kirishima looks up, tiredly. Oh, he summons up a strained smile. Hey Midoriya. Uraraka glances up at him in acknowledgement, trying to bring up a smile as well. She ends up looking back down at her food, bringing a clump of rice to her mouth. Her movements look stiff and twitchy. Are you guys alright? Izuku asks, bending lower to level with the two hero students. We're fine. Uraraka answers. Izuku straightens himself up. No, you're not. I know the basics of what happened, but I want to know what happened to you guys. The media didn't share any information except no other student has attained psychological damage or any serious injuries. Uraraka frowns, rubbing her thumb against her pointer finger anxiously. Kirishima looks to her, obviously worried. He looks back to Izuku, opening his mouth to say something. I couldn't do anything. Uraraka admits, I panicked when the villains appeared and lost the grip on my quirk. I'm useless without it or my wheelchair. I couldn't. She takes in a sharp breath. I couldn't get back up. The others, they had to protect me and I couldn't do anything. Izuku tenses. He'd almost forgotten. Uraraka was currently labeled as a crippled student, but her quirk helps her stay on her feet if she could just control it properly. I'm sorry. There's nothing to apologize for, man. Kirishima says, setting down his chopsticks. It's all part of becoming a hero, right? We all face these kinds of hardships and deaths. He chokes on his last word. Kaminari had so much potential. Kirishima whispers under his breath, he was such a fun and nice guy. Someone you could just hang around with. Izuku hates how they're so quick to tell him all of this. And he was so young. Uraraka adds with a sniffle. Izuku steps back, confusing the other students. I need to go. Got projects to work on. I'm so sorry this happened. You can come find me if you need to talk. All right. Kirishima says with a more hopeful smile, we'll come find you.